Okay, welcome everyone to the July 27, 2022 meeting of the Planning Board. We will start with a roll call, alphabetical roll call vote of who's here. The board, Clark, start us off.
Brewer here.
Tom Callahan here. Kevin, you're up next.
Kevin Hine here.
Deirdre Hobson here.
Chris.
Chris Plex here.
Okay, I'm sure Amy will join us shortly. We're also joined by our town planner, Lauren Lind, our town council, Carolyn Murray, and our taker of minutes, Angela Giso. So welcome, everyone. We'll start by Lauren, if you could tell the public how they can participate in tonight's hearing if they wish.
Thank you. For members of the public wishing to comment on a particular application, there will be a designated public comment period. We ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please input your name and address, and you can leave written comment or indicate that you wish to speak to a particular item. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So our first order of business, we have a continued public hearing about our proposed access regulations. The last time we continued this because of the desire to let the zoning working group, now the zoning bylaw committee, deal with this further before it's brought back to the board. So I'll make a motion that it be continued. I'll give it a date. Let's give it a date at the end, whatever our 2nd September meeting is. But, you know, frankly, where my own personal thinking is where this is going, and, you know, with the bylaw being under review, I'm perfectly fine with if anybody wants to make a motion to close the hearing, and then we'll just punt this back to the bylaw committee to work on. But for the moment, I'll make a motion to continue to September, whatever our meeting is. And I want to note that Amy Glassmeyer is here, so we have full attendance tonight. Welcome, Amy.
Chairman, could you explain, if we punted back, what that means?
Well, it's obviously a controversial topic, and I think it ties into other things that may or may not be discussed within the context of the redoing the bylaw. And I was just saying to Carol that, you know, having seen that Situate has an amendment of their common driveway bylaw on their town meeting warrant, the part of this regulation that we borrowed from Plymouth is a bylaw in Plymouth. And my personal thinking is starting to evolve about whether this should be bylaw or regulation, but I still think the substance of it in either direction needs to be further vetted by the bylaw committee, and the bylaw committee just hasn't had that opportunity yet since it's just recently been reconstituted. So I just think we should, since it's tied into many of the things in the rewrite of the bylaw, I just assume have that committee deal with it first and make recommendations to our board about what to do with it. And that includes the direction of whether it's bylaw or remains a regulation.
So sir, if you wouldn't mind, for the members of our new members of the committee, could you explain the difference between bylaw and regulation? Because I thought when I first began, I didn't understand that.
All right. Well, I mean, at all levels of government, there are laws and statutes. On the local level, we call them bylaws, and then underneath that, agencies who manage those laws are allowed to pass regulations which deal with some of the nitty-gritty details or day-to-day operation of that law that sets out a broader principle. A regulation is amendable by the board that governs it by a majority vote at a public hearing. Does not have to go to town meeting to be amended. And the thinking of a regulation is that it gives you more flexibility to deal with changing best practices, changing circumstances. The bylaw, the real difference is the bylaw just simply would need to go through an amendment process through town meeting. The common driveway regulations, I don't know how long they've existed as a regulation, but you know, other communities as Situate I just mentioned deal with it as a bylaw, and Plymouth deals with part of it that we were adopting from Plymouth as a bylaw. I'm just thinking, given the significance of the change that's being proposed to our current standards and the introduction of new standards, my thinking is evolving that this should be dealt with as a bylaw so that it gets fully vetted by town meeting. It'll make it more difficult, or not difficult, cumbersome to amend in the future if we need to, but I think there's a benefit to perhaps that, given the nature of the changes we have proposed on the table. So, but obviously from the discussion here with new members, I don't think we're ready to discuss it amongst ourselves as substance yet. And I'd rather see the zoning committee deal with it and make a recommendation first. And certainly pick a direction in which way to go. But that's essentially the difference between the two.
So sir, let me just encapsulate
Sir?
by saying that there is,
Sir?
yes, sir.
Don't call me sir.
It's so much easier. So one is a rule and the other is a regulation.
No,
And
one
the
is
rules, the
no,
rule,
one is a no. Rules have a definition in the law too. No, a bylaw is a law. It's equivalent to a state statute or a federal statute. It is law, and that is in the state and federal context. They most often deal with a broader principle, and then the governing agency fleshes out details through a regulation, and those details. A regulation can be amended easily without having to go through the process of amending a law, which would be by our legislature or Congress, or in our case, town meeting. And it's more flexible in dealing with changing circumstances and best practices.
all right, thank you.
Not to belabor the conversation, but I do see that on the agenda, we have new language for that. And I don't see that on the active applications. So I'm probably looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, you probably, I think it's on the planning board office page, is it not?
Okay.
Ms. Lind?
Lynn?
Thank you. Yeah, so if to direct anyone to find the documents on the planning board page of the website, you'll find typically where you would see on the sidebar active planning board applications, the bar right under that is common drive rules and regulations, proposed amendments, and those are the documents there.
I was looking in the wrong place. Thank you.
No problem.
And in the meantime, our current common driveway.
You have another
regulation-
question, sir, by Mr.
Amy, I'm not kidding now. Knock off the stir.
It's just.
Kevin, please.
I was it shared, is it on the website, the Situate bylaws as they were presented to the members so that the public or these other committees can see them?
Somebody circulated Situate. I think, Lauren, you circulated it as an example as to what other communities are up to. Certainly you could probably go on the Situate Planning Board page or wherever they're posting their prospective warrant articles for their upcoming town meeting. You probably can find it there as an example, as a comparison. And I will tell you that the zoning bylaw working group had done some benchmarking and some comparisons of our common driveway regs as compared to others, and ours are different in both the length that is allowed and the number of houses or lots that can be served by it. That's one of the driving ideas behind the change. But the proposed regulation as it deals with private roads that are not subdivision roads and not common driveways, that came from a Plymouth bylaw. I can't cite you right here, the exact section, but there is a Plymouth bylaw. I believe it's called residential access that you can find within the Plymouth town bylaws. And that was the model for the proposed changes. Again, I think this needs further study by the bylaw committee, especially in the direction of, do we bring it as a bylaw or do we continue it as a regulation?
I would recommend we don't continue it. I'm just going to put that out there because then we'll have to go through this discussion again of explaining bylaws and regulations and the differences, putting it to a committee again. If we're not prepared to act on this now, pushing it out, we'll just entertain more time on a busy agenda in the fall or September or whenever it lands. So let's clear it off the agenda now, put it in the
All right,
appropriate space and move on.
That's fine.
That sounds
That's
like a
fine.
motion.
That's fine. Then I'll amend the motion to close the hearing and we'll deal with this at another date.
Second.
Thank you. Amy?
I second that.
Okay. Chris, is your hand still up? You got another comment?
No, I'll take it down. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right. All right, all in favor of the motion, roll call vote. Clark,
Clark Brewer, aye.
Tom Kelly, and I. Amy,
Amy Glassmeyer, aye.
Kevin Heine, aye.
Deirdre,
Deirdre Hobson, aye.
and Chris.
Chris Plex, aye.
Thank you. Okay, where are we time-wise? 6:42. All right, so next we have a continued public hearing, site plan review for 25 and 30 Situate Hill. Do we have everybody promoted who needs, oh, hold on one sec. Rich, is your hand up for a particular reason? Rich Henderson? Is it- Rich, put something in Q&A if you have something to comment on. That's based on, oh, there he is. I'm sorry, there he is. Rich, is there something in particular?
No,
Okay. Thank you. All right. When we left off the Situate Hill project, we were still dealing with our peer review, going back and forth with the applicant. Lauren, who do we have from our team? Is that Paul?
I'm looking right now. We have the applicant here, Paul Davis and Greg Morse from Morse Engineering to represent the applicant.
Okay. Anybody from our team here?
I don't believe we have a peer review in the audience right now. Double checking.
All right. Did they know to be here tonight?
We did continue it to this date.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm aware.
So would we hear what the applicant, what
Yeah,
changes
all right.
are
So,
in what's proposed and
Yeah,
then hear from the peer review?
yeah, I was going to start with our guy first, but if he's not here, so be it. So Greg, if you want to tell me, the last go round with our peer review, where you all stand,
They may want to show us the updated documents that they have.
Yeah.
if they have, yeah.
Looks like July 22nd, 2022 is our peer review.
So on behalf of the applicant, this is Greg Morse, a registered engineer, Morse Engineering. As you recall, this is the development on Situate Hill, the property about 5.5 acres in size. We're proposing 3 tradesman buildings at the property ranging in size from 7,200 to 7,500 square feet. We've been before you multiple times at this point. Our latest submittal, I believe, addressed all of the outstanding items of the peer review consultant. At our last meeting, you had heard from them, you had engaged TEC to do the peer review at this site. I can run through the comments. They were very, very minimal, though. We extended some erosion control barriers along the limit of work. We revised 2 of the slopes from a 1-to-1 slope to a 1.5-to-1 slope, utilizing a detail of riprap that had previously been approved by the planning board. We added additional detail about the driveway, bringing the width of the driveway onto the site up to 24 feet, that a guardrail on site was to be constructed per Mass DOT specs as a steel guardrail instead of a wooden guardrail. And we found the missing O&M plan for the subdivision, which, as you likely recall, the subdivision was approved some number of years ago. An extensive drainage analysis had been done by that engineer, but the O&M plan had gone missing. That has been found, and the applicant is taking responsibility for all of the drainage at the site. We've achieved Board of Health approval of the plans. We've been to Conservation Commission and received the stormwater permit from Conservation at the site. You also have in your records correspondence from Fire Chief Doc Ray confirming that the access to the site is acceptable. You have a more recent letter from Chief Doc Ray requesting a sign at the top of the site in the in the emergency turnaround area, the applicant would install a sign if that was a condition of approval, just basically saying that nothing would be parked there. It would not be used as a parking space. It's for emergency vehicle turnaround only. Other than that, TEC did a final peer review of our final plan set. I believe all of their comments have been satisfied at this point. I'd turn it over to you.
Hold on a sec. Thank you.
Aren't there
Lauren,
updated documents like the site plan has been revised and the architectural design has been updated?
You know, so
But could you show the board, for those of us who haven't seen the documents on the planning board's active
I can, if I can do a
review
share,
folder?
if I can do a share screen, I will put them on the board right now.
Just show us what's new.
Yep. So since the last meeting, there's been no changes of the architectural plans. Well, let me just get the share screen here. The architecturals were submitted for the previous meeting. The architectural changes on the facade and on the siding of the building, rather than having straight sheet metal, we included a horizontal depiction. And then colors for the buildings, we had originally proposed a blue color, a cobalt blue, but we've changed that down to be more earth tones of gray buildings and tan buildings, essentially, at the site. There are your architecturals. And the site plans. On the site plans here, there's really no significant changes that you would see between the last set of plans and in this final one. But what you would see here, where I have my cursor along this side of the driveway, is a steel guardrail, where this used to be proposed as a wooden guardrail. Behind buildings A and B in this location, we originally had a 1-to-1 slope at that location. That's been revised to a 1.5-to-1 slope at that location.
Greg, is there any screening that you're proposing as a part of the development? And is there a sign at the bottom of the hill that would show who the tenants are or the building owner?
So
Some
at
kind
this
of
point,
introduction on what's up there so people don't drive up there mistakenly?
at this point, we were not showing a sign at the entrance of the driveway on the site plan here. Certainly could apply for a sign in the future to do that and identify the tenants as they're known. But no sign is proposed at this point in time at the site.
And screening in terms of vegetation?
So
I could see a clump of trees in the middle of the site between the buildings and the cul-de-sac. Is that what that is?
yes, it is. So those are an evergreen tree that would be there. We also, the majority of the front of this, aside from the 1.5-to-1 slope adjacent to the buildings being riprap, this would be just a grassed lawn area on the front of the site.
It's a grassy area, but not lawn that you'd cut, right?
No, it's meant to be maintained basically by cutting it twice a year.
all right, thank you. Is that it, Clark?
Well, I would
I-
think that the vegetation screening might be something that the board wants to discuss and as a part of our general discussion.
All right. Before I go to you, Amy, Lauren, do you understand there to be any other differences between TEC and the applicant over the specifics?
I would concur with the way the applicant has represented the TEC comment letter, and we'll confirm that we have the Chief Dockeray's comments on file as well, that you could just simply make a condition pursuant to the fire chief's requests.
Okay, thank you. All right, Clark, you messed up my rotation of who gets to comment first, but that's okay. Amy, you got your hand up. What's up? originally.
Yes, following with Mr. Brewer's comments about a sign signaling what that is and where people would be going, given that there is a steep slope and people could find themselves in a situation in a stormy or ice-filled evening in a bad situation, can that be designated as an incline so that people would know that they're not just going up a smooth driveway? Because it is an area that we have spoken about as being relatively steep, relatively narrow. And so we really don't want people that shouldn't be up there going up there.
Yeah, I think it is the applicant's intent to install a sign. It's just we don't have the specifics on it at this point. We would have to make an application for a building permit for the sign.
All right,
We-
thank you.
We can make that a condition and, subject to further review once you get your permit for where it would be located and what it would look like. All right, so next would be Kevin. Any thoughts, comments?
Kevin, you're muted.
You're out there, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm right here. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
With regard to the sign, I guess I'm surprised that even at a minimum, the numbers for the building don't need to be posted where the road comes down to the cul-de-sac from an emergency response standpoint, so that people from the fire squad, people from the police department or wherever, another town's ambulance, know where to go. So I think making that a condition, I think that's what you suggested, is a good one. Even if the sign is simply whatever the numbers are for those three buildings up there. Tying on to Clark's comment and question about the north side, the 1.5 sloped area that's going to be cut twice now. Greg, I'm just wondering if there's any option or whether any consideration was made perhaps to turn that into just a wild grass and wildflower meadow type thing. And that might not even require cutting it twice a year, but maybe from an aesthetic standpoint, it might be more appealing for people that are up in that area or driving up to that area before they turn onto the approach road on the right. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Deirdre.
I'm sorry if I missed this before, but I'm just curious if it's made as the stormwater management review on the peer review letter number 21. It says that TEC says if the board votes to approve the project, TEC recommends a special condition that requires the applicant to undergo a full cleaning and inspection of the existing stormwater system, with final report being submitted to the town. Is that something we just put into this decision that we make? I'm just sorry if I'm behind the
No.
eight ball on this.
No,
That's a
fine.
condition that we lay into our decision.
We can add it, but Greg, I'll give you the opportunity
Yes, thank you.
to tell us if you have any objection to that.
No, we don't have any objection to that. The drainage system within Situate Hill is going to be the responsibility of the property owner here. He's taking on the ownership and maintenance of that. So we want to make sure we're getting a system that's in proper operating condition for moving forward. We have no problems with that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Deirdre? Deirdre, anything else?
Muted, sorry. Just who will be responsible for in the town to make sure that this is being done? Where's the follow-up?
Well,
So I believe-
conditions of a site plan should be supervised by our building inspector.
I would add,
Yeah, I don't know if drainage has any other special reviews that it has to go under. DPW might.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thank you.
All right, Chris.
So I agree with Clark. I'd like to see more screening. I'd also note that the screening appears to be in different places on what Greg is sharing at the moment. and what's up on the website. So I don't know if that's something worth clarifying, but from my personal perspective, I think some level of screening for all three buildings would be worthwhile. And I also agree with Amy that a sign indicating who's up at the top of the hill would be useful. I think it would be useful if there was some warning of the steep driveway. I'm not going to dig in on that, but I just think that's appropriate and responsible to have something letting people know what they're getting into if they're trying to go up that driveway on a slippery winter day. That's all I've got, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Those make sense. Just one more comment about the,
Clark,
slope?
hold on. Clark,
Okay.
hold on. Amy had her hand up before you, so
Um,
Amy,
I just wanted to try to
ma'am.
congeal the conversation about the steepness of the slope and ask whether or not there should be a indication at the bottom of the drive that this is a private drive going up to a private property, and that there is some identification of liability that anybody that goes up there should be aware of.
And where do we start doing that?
Well,
on every-
I think that what we're doing is to protect the landowner and to make clear to anybody that would accidentally end up there that this is not a public way. It's a private way. It serves a single place, and that during periods of inclement weather, if you have no business being there, you shouldn't be there.
I presume, I'm not speaking for the applicant, but I presume there might be customers that will go up there for any number of purposes, but I think the protection of their liability is for them to worry about. I mean, our concern is the safety of the public, and I think warning that there is a slope of considerable grade is fine in conditioning that. I don't know how much further we need to go beyond that, but
Thank you.
okay. Lauren, I presume you're getting all of these possible conditions and proposed conditions from the board. Is there anything from your perspective you'd like to add?
I don't have anything to add at this time, and yes, I'll take note and incorporate these into the conditions.
Carolyn, anything that concerns you?
No, I don't have anything. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. We'll go with Clark.
yeah, so I think I just asked a couple questions while Greg was presenting about the signage in the area between the cul-de-sac and the buildings. And from some of the other members' comments, I really think that a little bit more vegetation screening at the top of the hill would help the overall proposal as opposed to a clump of small trees in the middle. I'm not sure what I think about the grasses, although, I mean, this would be, did Deidre brought up inclement weather? Or was that you, Tom?
No, I haven't brought up anything in particular.
But you know, the area in the front yard, so to speak, would make a great inner tube run. And it obviously, if the kids of Cohasset found it smooth and grassy, then
Well,
they'd
again,
probably try to do that like they jump off the bridge at the Gulf.
Yeah.
But I really think that some smart screening vegetation on relatively close to the buildings, but not up against them, would help this project. You know, a mass of a couple of trees and bushes and things in the middle, you know, within 20 feet of the building would help, I think, screen those a little bit and kind of break up those big, long steel undifferentiated facades, because you are going to be able to see these as you look up from Route 3A. All of the signage comments I thought were great. Chris making a comment about the steep slope, warning, some kind of navigation assistance to the public. And I think with who is there, I think would be a decision a comment that the applicant can follow up once there's a decision.
All right, I don't want to get
And
repetitious.
that's all I have to say about
right.
that.
Lauren, I understand we have two hands up from the public. Is somebody seeking to speak about this particular project? Who has their hands up in the public? I'm trying to
Sorry, I'm not
determine
seeing
who
hands
it
up in
is.
the public. I'd see Amy and Kevin's
Oh,
hands.
all right. My bad. I'm misreading the hands. Okay. All right, Amy, let's.
Yes, one of the things we learned in the analysis of storm surge is that whenever we create a road, we create a pathway for water to course. And so if we had a deluge like they just had in St. Louis, we've just created a corridor that will come down this hill and go down Situate Hill and land on 3A. And so I'm wondering, is there any means by which we can slow the water down as it moves from the top to the bottom? Because we now know that places are incredibly susceptible to this. And there's really simple things to do. There's things like putting riprap down both sides. There's ways of, distributing the water in different directions so that it's not all going to aim down on 3A. But if we literally had 9 inches in 7 hours, we would, and it was a cold night, we would have a absolute disaster. So can we think about that as a potential condition?
Well, Walter and Greg, I'll let one of you respond to that first.
There, as called out right here on the plan, there's already riprap stone down either side of the driveway onto this site. In addition, we have catch basins all along the sides of the driveway at regular intervals. So that has been addressed already. I would bring up that when this Situate Hill subdivision was approved.
Oops, we lost Greg.
Your voice is breaking up, Greg.
This project, or this site here in particular, when the Situate Hill project was originally approved, there was a 20,000 square foot building on this site with parking, and it was all handled by the detention basin at the bottom of the Situate Hill project. This project is significantly reduced in size from that, but we have incorporated those features that were just brought up, including the riprap down the sides of the driveway, as well as catch basins at regular intervals.
So Mr. Morris, I appreciate that comment, but this is about design and this is not about performance. And I think that we in Cohasset have to continue to focus on performance. That is, you've done a wonderful job of taking care of something that's in an abstract, but if we had a massive rainstorm, that's a completely different situation. So at least from the standpoint of public security and safety, we need to know what the potentials are so that we are prepared in advance for the consequences.
All right. Well, let me be the devil's advocate here. Amy, what do you expect them to do? They can't speculate on the future. They designed everything you just said. And you do that with the anticipation, I assume, that the design will work. And we won't know until, and this road, by the way, Situate Hill itself, the roadway has existed for who knows how many years now. And I'm not saying that future storms may be worse and create the threat, but I'm trying to get a grasp on what do you mean by design?
So what I'm saying is that I am really confident that we have excellent engineers working on projects like this. And if they were to be given a scenario that said it was going to be 2x or 3x, they would know what to do about that. And if this wasn't on access to a public highway in which hundreds of cars every morning and every evening go on it, I wouldn't care at all, because it would end up someplace in a wetland. But in this particular place, it goes right on 3A, which is a major highway. And all I'm asking is they can make scenarios. They can think about what would we do. You know, they could put rain gardens in here. There's lots of ways to manage unexpected water flow. And we've seen it. We're seeing it all over the country.
The scenario that we analyzed is the one that's called out in your regulations to be analyzed, which is 9 inches of water in a 24-hour period. This site handles it.
Thank you. That's very
All
clear.
right, Kevin and Clark, because this is going
Yeah.
longer than I anticipated. Is there anything new that we have here that you'd like?
I would like some clarification. The drawing is blown up in front of me and I've blown it up more on my screen to the extent that I'm trying to see what's around the edge of the end of Situate Hill Road, the cul-de-sac. Is that further riprap around that? It looks like to be a different pattern than what's along the actual driveway leading up to the area where the building will be. Can you explain that, Greg?
Yes, that's a lighter gray that you see. That's existing riprap that's already out there at the end of the cul-de-sac.
Okay, all right. That's what I thought it might be, and it's called out that way. I think that's helpful to know that that's there and that's designed there, and that will work in conjunction with the riprap you have along the driveway. I do like the suggestion for a rain garden, because I still think you have in that wedge of the property that leads up to the left and to the right to go around, wrap around the buildings that you have proposed here. You have that large open space with still a 1.5 or 1.5 grade that is going to be subject to higher flows of stormwater when storms do occur. And, you know, it's going to look great initially, but then we all know how it gets when the stuff gets dry. And then we get the next rainstorm that brings 2 inches of rain and you start getting rivulets in the ground, and then you start getting erosional issues. And these stormwater features that you have around the cul-de-sac and around that private drive only function to the extent that they can accept rainwater. When you start getting outwash, the erosional stuff coming down from areas like what I think I see here, which is only going to be grassed over, then you start losing the performance on those things. So I think the suggestion that was just proposed by Amy is a good one, that there should be consideration in this design on the area of that slope on the north side of these buildings for some infiltration galleries or rain gardens to complement and minimize any type of flow towards those features that you have designed, and rightfully so, along the road features there.
Okay. Walter, I'm going to give you the floor next.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. So just to sort of this general comment about stormwater, this project was previously approved by this board, or a project, excuse me, was previously approved by this board in November of 2021 for 19 buildings. And a condition that this board put in that approval was that the approval was subject to obtaining all other necessary approvals, including a stormwater management permit. And I think that would be an appropriate condition to put in here. You know, obviously Greg has designed this and it's been peer reviewed and it meets with state and local requirements, but certainly we also have to get a stormwater management permit. And I think these concerns can be addressed in that process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Walter. Clark and then Chris, and then I want to wrap this up.
Yeah, 2 comments. There are no sidewalks. I don't really see any pedestrian activity here, but I could see at some point in the future having a path to the train station from Avalon along the common property line with the storage building. And I wonder if the applicant would be okay with a future easement for that. I think that may be something that can be worked out. And also I can see these big metal roofs being a perfect setup for photovoltaic panels. So I'd like to, unless any other board members would object, I'd like to have as a condition requirement that the applicant make a good faith effort to lease or try to net meter solar panels on these large roof areas, which really wouldn't be seen from anywhere. Any other thoughts by other planning board members on those?
I'm looking at the site plan review bylaw to see how and where we have the authority to require that, but we
I'm
can-
not saying require, I'm saying good faith effort
Yeah, understood. Okay.
and volunteer in terms of the pedestrian easement.
All right. Okay. Chris?
At the risk of beating the stormwater issue to death, I do think with the smart people we have here, it'd be interesting to see if we saw double the required spec for rainfall, what would happen? I think that would be interesting information, valuable information for the board to consider. So
All right.
that's where I'll leave it. I'd be interested to hear an expert opinion on what happens if double the spec rainfall happened with this design. It is on a very steep slope, so I think it's appropriate for us to, at the very least, ask.
Yep. Understood. All right. So trying to bring this to a head for tonight. Obviously, we seem to be all focused on the stormwater management issue, and we can do this one of two ways, because dealing with runoff is one of the things we have authority to deal with under site plan review, and either we can deal with it, or we could punt it to the Conservation Commission under the stormwater management bylaw and have it deal with it, with the condition that, you know, whatever changes they make would have to come back, and our decision would need to be amended accordingly if it needs amendment.
Didn't they say they already went on stormwater?
Walter, did you say you had been or you were going?
Yes, Greg's actually pointed out to me that we do have a stormwater permit. And so I referenced a prior decision on that, not being mindful. Greg has already obtained that permit.
All right. Well,
Excuse me, but
no, hold on, Amy. Hold on a second, will you please? All right. So the board's pleasure that we have another board who has jurisdiction over stormwater management has made a decision and has issued some, which I presume, Greg, is this plan. They've approved this.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, again, we have authority under the site plan review bylaw to condition issues relating to runoff, and there's no reason we have to agree with the Concom on that. So what is the board's pleasure here? Do we close this here? No, not close the hearing, continue it for a discussion of draft conditions at the next meeting, or are we having another meeting to see further stormwater measures taken as we have all described and outlined here tonight? If the board members would simply focus on that question, I would appreciate it without further comments. Clark?
Yeah, I think we could ask them to plan and locate a couple of rainwater gardens in a high velocity runoff location that certainly wouldn't hurt this. I believe that the cul-de-sac that's in place has a drainage detention basin at the bottom of the hill. Greg, can you confirm that?
It does.
It's down where that
The water
where
that
that
hits the
riprap is.
cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And Situate Hill Lane or whatever it's called, would get directed to that retention basin. But a few rainwater gardens, I don't think they're awful expensive, and some square footage, 100, 200 square feet, whatever would be reasonable, not an unreasonable request of the applicant. I think that, we could just put it in the decision.
Right. All right. Well, here's what I'm going to suggest is that for our next meeting, August 10th, Lauren has already started working on a draft decision. We will finish that with the additional comments regarding conditions tonight. Have that ready for the 10th, but also between now and the 10th, have the applicant submit some additional plans for either rain gardens, screening, additional perhaps change of vegetation from grass to something else on this slope based on the comments you've heard. Lauren, I'm presuming we have time on the 10th to deal with all of this.
We do.
And, on the 10th, we can look towards making a decision. We can have our peer reviews see this as well. If not, then we continue it again to the 7th of September to make our decision. But I think we can have a large part of the conditions, draft conditions in place by the 10th, and ask the applicant to do some additional stormwater management and screening proposals that we've suggested here tonight. And again, Clark is right. If the applicant chooses not to do it, we can impose it. But, I prefer we work in a cooperative way here. And Greg and Walter, I think you've heard from the members of what they're looking for. So I think you have some clear direction.
I have heard. I would like to discuss them a little bit further in detail if we could.
Right.
Tom.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at, we have a long agenda tonight. I'll give you a couple minutes. So.
Okay. I think many of the members here have seen plans from my company in the past, and you'll recognize that I use a multitude of stormwater devices on these sites. I propose rain gardens on at least 50% of the projects I come into Cohasset with. This is not a site for a rain garden. This is a steep slope. Rain gardens aren't made for this type of site. They're not made for rate attenuation. They're made for flat locations so that you get sediment removal efficiencies. Another way to get sediment removal efficiencies is the placement of riprap, which you'll see that we've done extensively. I heard a comment from a board member saying we should include dry wells. I think if you look at the plan, you'll see that we have dry wells in the parking lot here attached to the roofs so that you don't get significant runoff off the roof areas. I've incorporated the BMPs that are recognized by the DEP that have been approved by the Conservation Commission for a 9-inch storm event in 24 hours. That's the 100-year storm event. I don't think we've ever witnessed 9 inches of rainfall in 24 hours, and the suggestion that we get 18 inches in 24 hours, I think was made. Everyone gets wet in that scenario. This site is 5 acres in size. It's an extremely small tributary compared to the remainder of Situate Hill. Adding half a dozen rain gardens of 200 or 300 square feet on this would have zero impact to the runoff going to Route 3A. I'm glad to put a couple in, but realistically, they will have no effect whatsoever on stormwater leaving this site. The seed mix on the slope, I'd be glad to give you a couple of options from different grasses or different native mixes. If you wanted to incorporate that into a condition, I could give you 3 different types of seed mixes before your next meeting for you to discuss. And then lastly is the screening. What I didn't show you on the landscape plan or the site layout plan is the actual breakdown of the trees. What we've proposed here, we have 18 trees proposed. They're red maples and they're green arborvitaes. They're 6 to 8 feet in height. We have them essentially in 2 locations. We have a cluster of trees right here, and then we also have trees going up the driveway. You see them on the side of the driveway here. Those locations were chosen because as you drive along 3A, which is at the bottom of the page here, you won't see through the existing storage building here, which has also a fully vegetated lot behind it, shielding this site. The only time you get a glimpse of this site is if while you're driving on 3A at a speed of 40 miles an hour or so, and you turn your head 90 degrees and look uphill significantly, you'll get a small view shed between the brass kettle building and the storage building right through here. It's approximately 100-foot area that you would only take about 2 seconds to traverse while you drive. These trees at this driveway and these arborvitaes were placed there in that view shed specifically for that location. I can add additional trees up along the back of these buildings up here if you would like. I don't think you would even see those trees while you drive by on 3A, or it would make any impact because you're not going to see them through the storage building at the bottom of the site. that was my quick response to the comments.
I
right.
just have a quick question following up to that, Greg. In that area where you're talking
Kevin,
about putting the seeds, is there an underlying membrane or something that will keep the soil in place for that area of the steep slope? I can't tell this on the design you have in front of me in the drawing, but if you do, I would expect it to be labeled. That's why I just wanted to ask this quick question.
So on that area there, it's a 2-to-1 slope, which we have a detail of the 2-to-1 slope right here. 2-to-1 seeded lope. It's a subgrade with just 6 inches of topsoil. It has an erosion control blanket labeled on the top of it prior to the seeded lawn.
Okay, can you circle with your pointer where that is on the other drawing that shows the area?
Right here. So it would simply be when you look at the grading and utility plan right here.
Yeah, where is that underlaying garment? Is
Oh,
it all in that area?
It's not,
there?
it's in any of these areas that the slope is at 2-to-1.
Okay, I thought that was a 1.5 to, I thought you would change that slope to 1.5.
So right here, this embankment immediately behind the building is 1.5 to 1, and then it becomes a 2-to-1 at this location. So this is 1.5 to 1 immediately behind the building, and then below that is a 2-to-1, where the contours get a little bit wider in between the contours.
And that membrane, just to be clear, will be in which of those two areas or both?
In the 2-to-1 embankment area. The 1.5 to 1 embankment area has riprap on it.
Okay.
All right. Need to wrap this up in light of our agenda tonight. So obviously this is going to be continued. Lauren, if we have time for our next meeting, I would continue to then. I would suggest, Greg, that you make the changes that you believe are necessary. The board at the next meeting will need to decide if those are sufficient or to add additional conditions. We are open to doing that. And we'll bring this to the head to the next meeting. So if I could have a motion to continue it to August 10th at 6:30.
Motion.
Okay, all in favor, Clark,
Aye.
Tom Callahan, aye. Amy? Amy? Kevin?
Kevin Hine, aye.
Deirdre?
Aye.
And Chris?
Aye.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. I would expect at staff level, talk to each other and figure out what you're going to propose to us, get new specs for what you're going to do in advance of the meeting on the 10th, at least by a week. And the board, if the board has specific conditions, please come with specifics. And we'll see you then on the 10th.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. All right, next on our agenda is, who's that going?
Sorry, that was Richard Henderson.
All right, next on our agenda is a public hearing for a site plan review and a special permit under the land alteration bylaw. Lauren, if you could read the public hearing notice, please.
Yes. All right. Notice of public hearing, Cohasset Planning Board pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A and Section 300-12.4 and Section 300-12.6 and 300-18 of the Cohasset zoning bylaws. The Planning Board will hold a virtual public hearing via Zoom, webinar ID 824-9771-6107, password 761904 on Wednesday, July 27th, 2022. At 6:30 p.m. on the application of Joseph and Lillian Sestito for a land alteration special permit and site plan review approval. The subject properties are shown on a Cohasset Assessor's Map D115532 and D115533, otherwise known as 534 Beechwood Street and 32 Doane Street. The application is for the renovation of the existing mixed-use building at 534 Beechwood Street, as well as the approximately 180 cubic yards of exposed ledge removal and approximately 800 cubic yards of earth removal to construct the parking area. A copy of the application and plans accompanying documents are on file for viewing in the town clerk's office at Cohasset Town Hall, 41 Highland Avenue. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Electronic versions of application material can be obtained by contacting Planning and Zoning Director Lauren Lind via email at llind@cohassetma.org. Any person interested or wishing to be heard on the application should attend the virtual meeting at the time designated. Signed, Thomas J. Callahan, Chair, Cohasset Planning Board.
All right, thank you, Lauren.
Thank
All
you.
right, Rich, I presume you're taking the lead on this for the applicant. I want to keep to our schedules, so if you could make your presentation perhaps briefer than you planned, but you have the floor. Richard? Richard, you're muted.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're echoing now.
I'm sorry?
You're echoing, but
Yeah, I hear the same thing. I hear an echo from you as well.
well, let's see what we can do with this, and if it gets too much, we'll go to Plan B.
All right, thank you. Again, I represent Mr. and Mrs. Sestito, who are the proponents of the project. With them tonight as well, there's civil engineer Brendan Sullivan and their architects Susan Hoadley and Corina Martinez. I was going to go over a few historical points. Lily Sestito will then make a brief presentation about her vision for the site. Brendan will go over the site plan and the site plan criteria, and to the extent that you need information on the structures, Susan and Corina will provide that information. The store, which is the subject of this hearing, and the site on which it's located, have operated as a general store for almost 2 centuries. The first 130 years, it was an unzoned site, and for the last 60 to 70 years, it's been a downtown business district. In addition to this store being used as a retail outlet, a general store, it was also the original home of the Congregational Church, Second Congregational Church. It was also the site of political, social, and public events for years. However, then and as now as going forward, its primary purpose will be a general store. The store was first opened as a community general store in 1820 and continued as such until 1974. From that time to the present, it's been a mixed-use residential and business site, the most recent business site being a repair shop. From the time of the adoption of the initial zoning bylaw to the present, this part of Beechwood has been a designated downtown business district. It appears as such on the 1955 zoning map and on each subsequent revision of the map to the present version. The applicants are Joseph and Lily Sestito, who are lifelong Cohasset residents and have operated many successful businesses in the community. Moreover, their efforts are not limited to generating income from their businesses, but have been directed to community enhancement. In fact, on another Beechwood landmark, the Congregational Church was in danger of becoming just another house lot. Joe and Lily pursued a nonprofit venture to buy the church and conserve its use for community purposes. Ultimately, the Cohasset Historical Society stepped up and saw the project to its inclusion. The Beechwood store is another example of that business linked with a community purpose, which will enhance the community and bring back something that was a vital part of Beechwood for 200 years. Lily's now going to just address the committee and talk about her vision for the site.
Thank you, Rich.
Lily, are you?
See Lauren's hand up?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Sorry, just want a quick question. Mr. Henderson, are you on twice? Are you the other Richard? Because we may be able to fix your audio. If that is you.
I'm sorry?
Do you have a second login? There's another Richard here, and I think that's why he's echoing.
Still using your cell phone to call in?
There we go.
Well, anyway, I promoted Lily Sestito to address the board.
Okay, thank you. Am I all set to go?
Yeah, go ahead, Lou.
All right, excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Lily Sestito, and I have my husband here, Joe, and we are current residents of Beechwood Street, where we raised our 3 children. And we are not your average builders and developers. We are both lifelong residents, both raised in Cohasset, with me just around the corner from the project at hand. So restoring and reopening the Beechwood General Store has been a dream of ours for over 30 years. I started hounding poor Herb Brown, who's the 5th generation of Browns, to run the store shortly after Joe and I bought JJ's in 1989. Mr. Brown already knew me as the neighborhood kid who started delivering the Patriot Ledger to them at 10 years old. We would run into each other around town and occasionally at Shaw's, and every Memorial Day where he proudly marched as a Navy veteran, and I've had the privilege and honor to sing there every year. He never failed to ask, well, how's your ice cream shop doing? I think he was always nervous for us since I was 22 and Joe was 25 when we bought JJ's. However, I would always reassure him that we were doing great. And then the conversation would always turn to me saying, you know, Mr. Brown, we would love to get that general store back up and running. And he would always chuckle and say, well, maybe we'll see. However, this was his family home where he raised his 4 children, where he and Ruth still lived, and where he continuously ran a business out of that space where the general store once was. Even still, I somehow think that deep down, we all knew that us restoring the store was inevitable. Well, here we are 33 years later, and we can't even begin to tell you how excited we are for this project. The Brown store once was the central hub of Beechwood. It had everything and served the Cohasset community for over 150 years, from 1820 till 1974. And I was lucky enough to go there as a child, and I can still picture the inside as it was, with the soda fountain and all the goods. And of course, as a kid, mostly the candy counter. So imagine our surprise when we did purchase the property and we realized that the original candy counter, the soda fountain head, the coffee grinder, the post office box, the ice chest, and all the antiques that were used to run the general store were still there upstairs in the barn, just waiting to be restored and renewed. I truly believe the reason Herb and Ruth never sold out to any of the developers, and there were plenty that tried, I believe they didn't sell out to them, is because they wanted the legacy of the general store to live on. The Browns have always believed in service over self, and I think they knew we felt the same way. So that is why we are asking to be allowed to rebuild and restore this amazing property, and we are not asking to raise it, which frankly would have been a lot cheaper. We can't wait to bring the building back to her former glory so that future generations can once again enjoy having a neighborhood spot to get together, grab a cup of coffee with friends, or maybe an ice cream on a warm summer night. I remember buying and flying kites and little balloon planes in the park.
Hold on. Richard, are you on twice by cell phone and by Zoom? Okay. Who's the second Richard that's on the screen right now? Somebody's creating an echo and we got to stop it, or we're going to have to continue this because it's getting to the point where we can't hear what you're saying. All right. There's 2 Richards on the screen. Who's the second Richard? It says Richard Henderson and it says Richard. Who's Richard?
I don't know.
Well, that was just your voice. So you're on twice, Richard, and that's what's causing the echo. So log off one of you, and
I did.
well, there's 2 of you on the screen right now.
Tom,
And that's
as long
what's
as he's
causing.
got one muted, he's fine. And he's got one muted right now.
All right, Lily, I'm sorry, but if we could, you can continue, but I'd like to cut to the chase of what's being proposed.
Yeah, okay. So what I was going to say, I remember buying the little kites and the balsam planes, and maybe we can now get the kids off their cell phones and get them back outside playing wiffle ball and kickball. We envision a good old-fashioned general store with a little bit of something for everyone. So we are here to ask you what you need from us to make this happen, because we are ready to go. We are actually beyond ready. And as the old Beechwooders would say, time's a waiting, so let's get the show on the road.
All right. Is there any other presentation coming from Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, if I could
All
just
right.
share my screen.
Yes, please. The specifics, please.
Sure. So I think as Rich said, so this is in the downtown business district. It is, I think everybody pretty much knows where the property is, on Beechwood Street, bordered by the west by Church Street, and the east by Doan Street, and to the south by a single family home. The property comprises of two properties. There's the mixed use building up on Beechwood Street, and there's also a number 32 Doan Street, which is a single family home. It's right across from the ball fields and the cemetery up in the northeast corner. So what we're proposing is the mixed use, mainly general store on the first floor, 2 apartments on the second floor. We have a septic system on the northeast corner that is approved by the Board of Health with sufficient flow for the proposed use. We are through the square footage of the existing building, we're required to have 26 parking spaces, and we're requesting a 33% reduction. So we're proposing to construct 17 parking spaces and put 9 in reserve on this adjacent residential lot. We did some drainage calculations. Most of the parking lot will be gravel. The apron off of Doan Street and the handicap parking will be paved. There's a paved sidewalk going to the rear access of the residential access, which is on the southwest corner. There's also a main entrance to the general store on the proposed porch in the rear. There's also there's a doorway to the front facing Beechwood Street, which also has a sidewalk, which presently is not there today. So we are increasing impervious on the site, but we are reducing the runoff overall from the site. The runoff basically goes out to Doan Street, and then also there's a catch basin on this corner of the lot, on the corner of Church and Beechwood Street, where we have some of the roof leaders for the proposed structure going into. I believe that's about it. If you have any questions about the architecture, I'm sure Susan could answer your questions.
All right. All right, for the board's comments, Clark took the lead the last time. I'll start in the rotation with comments. My
Well,
first question.
Susan, just quickly run through the architectural drawings.
All right, sure. Go ahead, Susan. Is Susan on with us? Susan,
See,
there you are.
okay, so are you looking at existing plans?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the plan of the existing building built in 1820, which served as Brown's store until 74. As you know, it had fallen into profound disrepair. And when the Sestitos bought it, we worked with them to give form to their vision. This is the existing part. These are the existing elevations. They really don't convey the extent of disrepair that the complex was in, but in essence, if you go from the right-hand part of the north elevation, which is the elevation that would be the Beechwood Street elevation. You start with, this was the part of the original store. This was a connector, and this is a barn with some disrepaired structures attached to it. It's in the very traditional New England big house, little house, outhouse model, and we have kept that intact as we have sought to adaptively reuse it. So why don't I go immediately now to the probably the first floor plan and quickly tell you the extent of what we're proposing. The cash wrap would be in the center. The barn would also be part of the general store complex. The and JJ's would be on the side facing the ball field with a new covered deck. We're going to run our mouse around the new portion that we're proposing, which is this area right here. Everything else is essentially existing except for the rebuild of JJ's and the addition of the covered deck. So in order to make this complex work, it also proposes 2 apartments on the 2nd floor, which have very small lofts up above. But you can see that they are accessed from the back corner that Brendan described that's out toward the parking lot. And then their entrances are discrete from the retail entrance to the shop below, as well as JJ's. And now what I'd like to do to just keep moving is show you the elevations, which we hope you agree are a nod to what was there before, as well as the extension of something that's going to make a really quite iconic center to Beechwood. And that is that the Beechwood General will remain in the area right now that was the former entry. We will have a very obvious entry in the center. And then the existing barn will be renovated, but will stay as a barn expression with a nod to the way that it was before. And then we have a very, what we think is a very sort of vernacular fitting elevation, which holds the next incarnation of JJ's. The front to the ball field will conclude my presentation, and it just creates a very welcoming porch that brings the pedestrian from the ball field right up into JJ's to the window and invites them into a nice set of steps to sit and have ice cream and continue to enjoy all the things that Beechwood has to offer. So that concludes the architecture, I think. If you have any other detailed questions, be happy to entertain them.
Very well. Thank you, Susan. All right, start out the board. In the rotation, I'll start off. I'll make my comments quick, a quick list, and then you can comment on them, Richard and Brendan and Lily, as you see fit. Number 1, under the bylaw for the downtown business district and uses, I'm wondering what's the legal authority to have mixed use. Not that I'm against it, but I'm not seeing any authority for it. Number 2, curious as to how the number of parking spaces has been calculated, on what basis. Number 3, the height. I'm just looking at Susan's drawings of how height's been calculated for the 2 tall parts of the building. And number 4, I appreciate the impervious driveway, pervious driveway, parking area. I was going to suggest that. But with respect to the land alteration and the ledge removal, you know, the first project we took, we had a very absolutist point of view that nothing should be removed. And that applicant was covering up some exposed ledge, but then was uncovering more than twice the amount that it was covering. So it was a net gain of exposed ledge. I'd like to know where the exposed ledge is being removed and why, and if there are other alternatives to doing that. So those are my comments, questions at the moment. So
3 inches is the highest.
I'll either let anyone answer those 4, or I'll move on to our next board member with their comments.
Tom?
Yeah.
If I could help you with the zoning questions. Are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's the general store part of the project is permitted.
Yes.
The mixed use part is non-conforming. It's been a residence and a business for about 200 years. There have been 1 and 2 families living in the building almost all the time, and there's been a mixed use business operated even after the store closed in 1974. So it's a combination of permitted uses and non-conforming uses that have existed since zoning was adopted.
Well, has the grandfathered use of the apartments been abandoned?
No. Someone was living there as recently as the closing when Lily and Joe bought the store, one of the
I'd
Brown
like-
family
all right,
members.
well, if you would indulge me on that point, I'd like to see the evidence of that, because you know as well as I do, a grandfathered use can lose its grandfathering status if it isn't used for a period of time.
We can get family correspondence and affidavits if necessary to deal with the issue of who lived there and when.
I appreciate that, Richard. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, the other issue you had was with regard to the parking.
The calculation of the space.
Yeah, the calculation was simply done based upon mixed residential and general store use. And it came up with the 26 spaces, of which 1/3 may be in reserve. So it's just according to section 7 of the zoning bylaw, based
Right,
on
no, I know.
retail and residence.
And what's the square footage of the retail?
Susan or Brendan can answer that.
Yeah, so I have, if you can see the screen, I have populated here.
Yeah.
We have approximately 2,000 square feet of the retail. We have the 195 retail of JJ's, and we have the 64 square feet of office space. And
All right.
adding that up, that comes up to approximately 2274 square feet divided by 100, you get 23 spaces.
Yeah.
Plus the 2 residential apartments, which are 1.5 spaces per 1-bedroom unit. So you get 3 spaces, 23 and 3, you get 26 total spaces.
All right, thank you. Just wanna,
The building height was measured from the existing average grade, which is approximately elevation 72, I believe. Yes, approximately elevation 72, and I confirmed with Susan that the height requirement has been met. And as far as the ledge
well,
removal,
how did you measure it from a number of points around the perimeter of the building? Because
Yes,
we've at least been changing that by policy, and it's, you know, upcoming probably for a change in definition, but we've at least by policy suggesting more than 1 or 2 spaces from the bottom.
oh yeah, we did the entire perimeter based on the average grade and the weighted value of the elevation around the proposed structure as it sits on the existing grade. As far as the ledge being removed, I believe we were allowed to alter the ledge under a parking lot in a proposed building. The ledge we're removing is the ledge we will be exposing is in this back area over in this area here, which we'll be cutting existing ledge and there'll be more ledge exposed. I believe that's how the bylaw is written. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the ledge under the parking lot
Yes.
is not under the ledge bylaw.
Yeah, so you're removing X square feet and exposing how much square feet?
Right, I'll have to come up with that figure.
All right, thank you. All right, I have nothing else, so other than that, there'll be an ice cream store within walking distance to a diabetic. I don't know how I'm going to survive that, but I'll manage. Amy. You're muted.
I only have comments about the residential structure and the extent to which it is going to have accessibility, or that there's at least 2 bathrooms on the site for accessibility of disabled.
okay.
Susan, you want to take that?
Yeah, we're pulling up a drawing that we can demonstrate to use. Okay, so this is the egress open, not required to have. Why don't you jump in? I'm gonna give this to Karina Martinez, who can talk about the accessibility strategy for the apartment.
Yep, please.
Hi, Karina Martinez, Hoadley Martinez Architects. Can everyone see the apartment floors?
Yep.
Okay, so we're proposing 2 apartment floors, and they will all be accessible within these rooms themselves. However, the access from the ground floor to these apartments is done by these set of stairs here. We don't have any ADA 521 CMR requirements to provide an elevator to these apartments because we have less than 3. On the ground floor, here, we have the accessible ramp that brings you to the door here. And then you have complete accessibility to accessible bathrooms here and here, and then 1 for the staff. So 3 accessible bathrooms for the entire complex on the first floor.
Can I ask, is this listed on the documentation of the diagrams?
Repeat that question again.
Are the descriptions that you just provided also listed somewhere on diagrams?
But we can provide them. No, but if you'd like for us to provide an outline of how accessible bathrooms are calculated in that, we can do that.
Yeah, we'll provide an accessibility summary.
Yeah, I honestly, be truthful, I don't know what the rules are, but I would expect somebody would want us to have a document that describes exactly what was done.
Yes, typically when we submit construction documents, we do a code summary and we outline what's required and what we've provided.
All right.
And we can provide that for you as well.
Okay, Amy, anything else? Amy?
No, I have nothing more. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Kevin?
I heard some reference to,
You just went mute. You went mute.
sorry about that. Can we talk about how pedestrian traffic movement of people will occur around the exterior from, let's say, the ball fields or from across the streets to the patio areas to the doors of this building? Perhaps you could point out areas where there may or may not be sidewalks, if those are proposed as a part of this. Curbing, will that be a part of this or not? My understanding is that area does not have curbs. How will traffic flow from a pedestrian standpoint be managed to and from this building from the areas around it? Could you speak to that?
Sure. So from the parking lot, we do have a sidewalk abutting the parking lot that we do have curbing facing that. We have an accessibility aisle here, and as Susan had mentioned, it goes over the existing, we'll go over the proposed septic tanks, and there is a ramp that will go up to and make this accessible up to the porch of the general store. We're also proposing a sidewalk on the Beechwood side with curbing, and then that will go. Not quite sure. We haven't really discussed actually the how we're going to tie into the Beechwood Street and the ball fields across the street. But my idea is probably, because there is a stop sign here, would probably be to incorporate maybe a crosswalk there as well in front of the stop line. It's a 4-way stop, so it's very well controlled. There's not a lot of traffic coming from the north end of Beechwood Street. A lot of people making this turn. So it's a good visibility area there. So maybe thinking a crosswalk, probably have to talk to DPW and Brian Joyce as well. But my suggestion would probably be a crosswalk across over to the ball fields, the parking lot, and the playgrounds.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Appreciate the additional info with regard to a crosswalk and tying that into the adjacent areas. The other point I just wanted to ask about, I'm seeing renderings that show external lighting, and it appears that they're all facing downward. Is there anything that would be facing other than down? And what would be the wattage on these on this lighting? The reason I ask is this is an area which still has dark skies.
Yeah.
It's adjacent to a significant state park, and if there is any lighting for the commercial side of this purposes on the exterior, I would want to see some attention to the details and a nod to having it be not intrusive to both the residents around there and just the general darkness of the area.
Okay, I could grab that question. We're committed to using only dark sky compliant lighting. Lighting that has baffles and shields that will only illuminate the intended area, minimize light escape, and also minimize light pollution skyward. So we would commit to using only DSC, dark sky compliant certified lighting.
And that would be specified in appropriate language in the drawings and plans.
Sure, we can absolutely add that and commit to it.
I would absolutely encourage that. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Kevin, we are, just so you know, we are like in the habit now of requiring dark sky compliant lighting in almost every project where we have a say on lighting. So that is becoming the norm. So
yeah.
All right, are you all set, Kevin?
All set. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Deirdre?
No, I have no comments at this time. I think that the improvement to the neighborhood and the whole structure that has been sitting there for so long is a great asset. You know, I just have the same concerns about the kids at the ball field running across, making sure that we have the proper access so that there's a crosswalk or there's some area that it's not a high traffic area. I've been down there many times. I have friends that live in the neighborhood and are delighted with the possible change to that whole corner of town.
Yep.
I echo Kevin's concerns and just some cautiousness about making sure that we have the right crosswalks and places for the children to move from the playground and the ball field, et cetera, over to this new structure.
Yeah.
That's it.
For those who don't live up there, the sidewalk comes right down to Dome Street along Beechwood, along the cemetery. There's a vegetated traffic island there in Beechwood Street. I don't think there's a crosswalk that goes through it or around it. And I don't think there's a crosswalk then coming across the street that would lead from the ball field to this site. So I think those are, you know, the crosswalk from the cemetery to the ball field is further down here away from the intersection. I think the applicant will have to explore with DPW and the public safety departments what we can do about some additional crosswalks in this area, because Deirdre's right. I mean, there's going to be a natural flow from the playground and the ball field to this place. So, Chris? Chris Brooks?
Yep. So first question, where you have the septic field marked, just again, thinking about the pedestrian traffic, is that going to be a grassy area? What are your plans for that?
Yeah, I believe it is proposed to be a grassed area. It's going to be raised from what the elevation is now. So it's, you know, I think maybe Lily's envisioning maybe a couple, you know, picnic benches out there to, you know, for the people who have their ice cream after they get it and stuff, something like that. But yeah, that'll be a landscape grassed area.
And again, with the pedestrian traffic, just asking the applicant to be thoughtful about whether fences in certain areas there would make sense. Again, coinciding with a crosswalk if that's where we end up with. So no specific requests, just be thoughtful of that as we're thinking about how people are going to walk in and out. The other question I have is on the parking lot. I can see that the parking lot accesses Doan Street. I can't tell from the drawings for sure. Would the parking lot not also access Church Street?
No, it's just Doan Street.
Okay, and that's an elevation issue on Church Street?
Yeah, it's an elevation and quite frankly, access as well. I think it would have, not to put a burden on Church Street, but we just like the idea of having the one access in and out.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
All right, I just have one more quick question. Behind the 32 Dawn, where you have the reserved parking spaces, what's there now? I know I drive by it every day. I can't picture what's back. Is it wooded? Is it vegetated?
Yeah, it's fairly wooded. There's an existing shed back here. Their leaching field is over here.
So would you leave that alone unless and until you have to use the reserve area? I would like to see it left alone until then.
Yes, we are planning to leave that alone unless it's necessary to build the additional spaces.
Okay, thank you. Clark?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments too. The mixed use concept, I think is preferred for downtown business. In the past, the planning board's taken a look at a couple of things over at West Corner, and it was always a struggle to get the applicant to propose retail or office space or anything other than residential. So I think the mix and the sort of restoration of the use are to be applauded. I think that this is an excellent way to enliven a neighborhood where I just looked at the aerial photography, and there's dozens of houses within 1,000 feet of this location, and I could just see families, moms, dads, people being able to use the benefit from the mixed use aspect. Of course, from a zoning perspective, mixed use can lead to problems, but usually I think Kevin touched on the lighting aspect, and whether there's lighting or noise or sometimes residential neighbors worry about the mix, but where there's a residential use on the second floor, it'll be relatively self-policing where those residents aren't going to want late store hours, that kind of thing. But I think the mix that's proposed, retail and a JJ's, are excellent ones. I also would recommend a crosswalk on Doan between the ballpark and this site, and I think the suggestion of fencing is a good one. The aesthetics, again, the use, the mixed use, I think are all very, very positive developments for the application. You went before the ZBA already under downtown business?
Yes. Yep, we have a current application on file with them.
And have they voted?
No, they kind of punted it back per se to site plan review to figure out the because really the parking is under your jurisdiction, so they wanted to figure out the parking and then get it back to them. I believe that's right, Rich? Is that Mike?
It is true. They wanted to make sure that everyone was on board with reserve parking, which would resolve the parking issues for zoning purposes. And since that's a planning board jurisdictional issue, we decided to come here before we went back to zoning to resolve those parking issues.
And so that the way that works is the reserve parking is an easement on the adjacent property?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the parking concept. The JJ's out on 3A, obviously on hot summer nights can get crowded, but then that wouldn't be the time of day that the retail would be in use. So, I mean, the project's, I think, too small for a shared parking study. Where you have the reserve, if there are issues, then there needs to be a mechanism in our decision about how that gets activated. But all in all, I think your team has done a great job. I like it.
Thank you.
All right. Again, want to keep this moving. Let me go to Lauren next. Lauren, is anything from your perspective that you have comment on?
I have nothing further to add at this time. Thank you.
Carolyn? Carolyn? is
No,
she-
the only one comment that I was going to add when you were talking about uses, and I know that Attorney Henderson's made an argument that it's been a non-conforming mixed use, and we'll wait to see what that information looks like. But under the use table, we do also allow dwellings for more than one family, including those in combination with stores or other permitted uses, by special permit in the downtown business district. Now, I know they have not applied for a special permit, but I just toss it out there as another possibility in the event that the non-conforming use / abandonment argument, if that should happen to fall away.
Great. And that, of course, that request would be made to the zoning board of appeals, not to the planning board, of course, I would think.
I think that's SP in the table. I'm looking at the table now. Would be the zoning board of appeals.
It is.
Yeah. All right.
SPP in the table is for us.
All right. Amy, is there something new you want to add? You're muted.
I'd like to add 2 comments, which is that I'm not completely clear on the hours that this operation will work, but I do think that in light of the fact that there's not a immediately local library, that there's a potential for the use of some aspect of the space for young persons to be able to go and work together and do homework. And I know that sounds pretty exotic, but all over the rest of the world, that's a pretty conventional thing to happen in the context of a retail site that works, 9 to 5, and then there's a place for kids to go with their parents. So I just put that out there. The second item is that I'm not comfortable having the ZBA punch a parking question to us and us not have it's kind of like we're between 2 places, and I would rather that the issue of the parking space be resolved from the ZBA's perspective than it be for us to create a circumstance that then goes back to the ZBA, but we've already approved it. And here's why. There is the property itself has a steep incline in the back. And so right now, how it's specified is they're going to bury the ledge. But on the other hand, that's a second best solution, really. And we don't know what the consequences of that will be. I would rather there be something that is more permanent and more effective as a transformation of a parking area than to say we're just going to bury the problem. And I also would feel uncomfortable having the ZBA punch it back to us, knowing that it's possible we would punch it back to them.
All right. Richard, why are you in front of the ZBA?
We went there for a special permit, and I don't have the
Special
application. It's so long.
Special permit for what?
Well, I believe that when we originally applied, it was for the mixed use that Ms. Murray addressed a second ago.
Right.
I'd have to look at the application, but here's the issue. The ultimate decision on parking is a planning board jurisdictional matter. That's why we came here first, because we talked about having so many places on the site and so many reserved parking spaces that only you can approve a site plan with that configuration. And that's why we came back. Wasn't really punted. It was a question of priority and orderliness, and it was more orderly to get the parking resolved on the site, and then we could address the other zoning issues. So it wasn't that we were thrown here. It was a conscious decision to have all of the parking on the site, including reserve parking, which is only something over which you guys have authority, and that's why we're here. once you decide that's okay, then we can go back, we don't have parking issues with zoning. We just really have the mixed use issue.
Okay,
And
so
that,
then
and
my-
that, well, and mixed use issue depends on your grandfather. Do you have any setback
it-
issue? Do you have any setback issues with?
No,
CBA?
everything is
No.
non-conforming. We don't, I don't think we do. Well, Brendan can address it better than I, but I don't
All
think
right,
we,
no, I'm not, I just wondered that, again, I agree with you about the jurisdictional dividing line between the two of us. Amy, is there anything else you want
I
to?
just would say two things, which is, it would be very useful if we could have this clear before we close it. And we do have 4 public comments to be addressed.
Yes, I'm going to do that next. So I'm well aware of it. All right, so regarding public comments, we have 3 statements of support from Ashley Mahoney, who lives in Beechwood, Karen Bitaro of 52 Church Street, and Whitney Griffin, who also lives 63 Church Street. We also have a question from Lisa Brown. Does the spot in front of the barn have a plan to have a concrete platform to avoid runoff or wet puddles? Who
This-
wants to take-
I'll,
Brendan?
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll take that one. The spot in front of the barn. I'm assuming on the Beechwood side, someone's talking about.
Yeah, I'm presuming as well.
So from the grades, the water does run down. It kind of splits around in this area where it goes to this catch basin around the corner of Church Street, and the rest of it runs down and goes across the street. There's a catch basin, which is on the east side of Doan Street, near Beechwood Street, up on this corner here. So all that water is going to run down over to there.
I haven't noticed this myself walking around there, but I'm presuming the question is asked because, and I'm going to presume for the moment someone in the Brown family, related to the Brown family who owned this, that there might be a puddling issue that happens there when it rains. I don't know if anybody's made any observations since we haven't had any rain to speak of. So
I can look at that.
I don't know if there's plans to deal with that, before it's a long run to that catch basin across the street. So.
Right, and I believe in some of the areas on site are actually lower than the grades in the roadway, so the water does, spill onto the site. But there is a small berm around the edge of the existing pavement, so be it 2 or 3 inches or so, that captures the water I believe it does either runs into this basin or it runs down and goes down to this catch basin down in here. Like I know it's a long run, but I can certainly look into that puddling issue if there is one there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Amy, something new?
No, I just would encourage Brandon to actually do a more microscopic analysis of the water pathways around the structure, because as we were discussing in the previous project, we have now increasing circumstances of levels of rainfall and water travel that naturally wants to go on roadways and naturally wants to go on sidewalks. So we should be thinking about that from the standpoint that we're creating pathways for water to come down rather than it to spread out. And I think our rules ultimately need to reflect that.
Rich, are you getting a stormwater permit from Concom?
Brendan? I think we
Yes,
are.
yes, we will
Yeah.
be. Once
Yes.
we get, once you guys are okay with the parking and everything, and that's really going to drive everything. So once we get the site nailed down, then we'll certainly go to conservation for a stormwater permit.
Okay. I just want to note that Ms. Brown, who just asked that question, also has added a comment that she supports the project overall. All right, so I think there's some updates to the plan that need to be made based on various members' comments, just including information on the plan. We have the issue of the grandfathering of the use. I'm not hearing strong objections to the parking configuration. Lauren, I assume we are not doing a peer review on this. I haven't, or are we planning to do that?
We have not initiated the peer review. If the board were to determine that was necessary, we would advance that, but at this scale of a project, it's not something that we typically would recommend unless necessary.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that, but if any other board member sees that, speak now.
Tom, can I just add
Yeah.
along those lines? You know, I'm just going to put it out there if we're not talking about that type of study. And I think I heard talking about whether this was subject to a traffic study or not. I am just observing that the entrance and egress from the parking area for 17 plus or minus parking spots is off of Doan Street. And so the continuous line of traffic is you go down Beechwood and then you turn left onto Doan, or you go up Doan and you turn right onto Beechwood. So the way in and out of this parking area is off of the main thoroughfare, so to speak, the Doan entrance. And could that lend itself to a Beechwood parking issue at times when maximum flow is going in and out of the building and the commercial use that's proposed here and maximum traffic in and out, and you create a bottleneck issue? I just put that out there for consideration.
Yeah, as a regular user of that intersection, it's obviously, there's a lot of traffic and people coming in and out of that parking lot are going to have to be wary of it. And we talked about signage in the previous project. And I think we are going to need some appropriate signage to alert people coming down Beechwood, making that left, that there's a driveway ahead of them. And then coming on from Situate along Doan and Church, that, you know, there will need to be some warning, but, you know, unless, I don't know that Church Street is necessarily a better alternative, and it creates, I suppose, with the slope, some engineering challenges. I do not think the driveway could come off over the septic system unless, but so I'm not sure that there's many alternatives, but I think we are going to have to deal that with appropriate signage and warnings to the public. All right. We have a few more public comments that have chimed in. Neighbor on Church Street, Christopher Norris, supports the store. He asked the question, can we find a path in which the board can be prescriptive and concrete with feedback to eliminate the back and forth of the varying boards? We are trying to do that, Mr. Norris, as much as possible. We each have separate jurisdictions. Sometimes there's overlap. I'm not exactly sure there is overlap in this case, but we will do our best not to have them go back and forth. The applicant chooses where to go first, and you know they are obviously also going to go to Concom for a stormwater permit after this. Mr. Peter Kulturides grew up on Aaron River Road, and this will impact this side of town in a positive manner. It will be great for families on this side of town as well as the neighboring Situate community. Tom Norton of 41 Red Fox Lane. I am impressed with the proposal presented tonight and fully support it. Huge improvement. And Nancy and Chuck Norris of 17 Church Street, supportive. Ed and Karen Hedstrom, live in Beechwood, fully supportive. And Jim Clark on 9 Church Street, expressing his support. All right, so we have some follow-up work. Lauren, what would be the appropriate night for us to schedule this?
I do believe that there is a possibility this could be taken up at the next meeting on August 10th.
Okay. No.
I'll make a motion to continue.
Well, hold on, Rich.
August 10th.
Rich and Brendan, do you think you could have things up to snuff by then?
So when do you need it? A week before?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you would need it by next Wednesday.
Yep.
Well, we can certainly shoot for it.
All right, good. Clark, we're going to make a motion
I made one.
I'll second it.
to, okay. All in favor? Clark?
Aye.
Tom
Clark,
Callahan,
aye.
aye. Tom Callahan,
aye.
aye.
Glassmeyer, aye.
Deirdre
Aye.
and Chris.
Aye.
Thank you. I'll just mention we have the residents of 16 Church Street expressing their support. So it seems everybody on Church Street who's here is supportive of the project, right? So we'll see you on the 10th. If you can't make that deadline, we'll move it to the next meeting after that, which will be in early September. Thank you all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving right along, we're quite a bit behind, but our next is the continued public hearing for site plan review for 46 Border Street, which is the wharf project. Mr. Brodsky, I'll let you start it off. I hope you have an answer about parking, which is the $1 million issue for everybody at the moment.
The answer is yes, Mr. Chairman. We do have an answer. Just to introduce myself, I'm Adam Brodsky, and I represent the applicant Lobster LLC, the manager of which is Tom Sullivan. Eamon O'Mara is our project manager, Susan Holy and Corinna Martinez are architects, and Darren Grady and Gabriel Padilla are engineers. And if you would be so kind as to promote Gabe, I'd appreciate that. And first, I just want to say thank you for the board's patience. We went through a lengthy process with the Zoning Board of Appeals and have reached agreement with respect to parking. As Gabe will explain to you, we needed to reduce uses and find some additional parking. But the Zoning Board of Appeals is an agreement that we're in conformance with the zoning bylaw. And we will have revised site plans, which Gabe is prepared to explain to you, to explain what we did to achieve that. Our next hearing with the Zoning Board of Appeals is on August 15th. And I understand that they're in the process of drafting a decision, and it is our hope that they'll close the public hearing and issue our special permits then. I should note that we do need to update our architectural plans to reflect really just the changes to the interior programming. I'll be corrected by Susan. I don't think there are any exterior changes or material exterior changes to the architecture, but as a result of the programming changes, we need to relabel some plans, and we will get those to you shortly. We obviously needed to finish up our issues with the ZBA before we went through that process. And we've also exchanged peer review comments with Weston and Sampson, and we're waiting to hear back from them. I don't know whether they're here this evening, but we've done our best to respond to their comments. Lastly, we're also in front of the Conservation Commission. Our next hearing is on August 11th. It's our hope that we can close that public hearing and get an order of conditions and move this project forward. So with that brief introduction, with your permission, I'd like to turn this over to Gabe to give you a quick overview of how we resolve the parking.
Yeah, if you could be, but obviously we're going to continue this. Let's just be, you mentioned change of uses. I'd like to just hear briefly what those are, what change in the number of parking spaces, if any, and then what your other solution is.
We're prepared to do that. And again, we understand that you want a quick synopsis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Good afternoon to everyone. Yes, I will go as quickly as I can with this. So we did go in front of the ZBA where we had the issue with the parking solved. At the moment, the building is of a restaurant use. It has 442 seats at the moment for a requirement of 147 spaces. That's the existing condition. With the changes that we have within the building, we are going to have a smaller restaurant. We're going to have a Lobster Pound, which is going to have a small retail area. We're also going to have retail kiosk, which is going to be operating seasonally. The rest of the building will be common areas. There's a covered wharf that's going to be for public use from 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. When after that, it'll be changed for the restaurant use. Now, we have done on our analysis of the parking, considering the hours of operation. Now, we have detailed here in our table here, have the existing requirements. They require 147. They have 52 spaces. We require 32 spaces according to the bylaw, and we are providing 35. Now, with the conversations that we have with the ZBA, it was recommended that we also find parking for employees in the kitchen area. So we are providing 10 additional spaces off-site, and that is still under agreement, but is part of the conditions that the ZBA are in agreement with.
Is
As far as-
the site, maybe you could just quick, I mean, your negotiations might not be finished, but it's not the town parking lot in Government Island, is it? Is that what you're considering, or is it another site also?
Mr. Chairman.
Adam, I'll defer to you.
Sure, thank you. And just to be clear, our parking is conforming. We don't need to provide employee parking, but we've agreed as a condition of the special permit to find 10 additional parking spaces. We haven't ruled anything out, but if we were going to consider, for example, Government Island, more likely than not, that would have to be improved to provide additional parking rather than take any of the existing parking. I think it more likely that we're going to deal with a private property owner than a town because of the difficulties of trying to either use any town property or improve town property. So
Yeah, the public would be very interested in whether it's public or private property. So that's why I apologize for interjecting the question. So Mr. Padilla, please continue.
Thank you. So we have provided 35 spaces on the site, and this will cover all the uses that we are proposing for the building. We have a restaurant that will be closed from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Those are pretty much the hours of operation of the rest of the uses that we're going to have, which are a coffee shop with 30 seats, Lobster Pound that has that retail area, retail kiosks, the covered wharf as public use, and the restaurant kitchen is closed. After that, after 5 p.m., the covered wharf is going to have seating for the restaurant. The restaurant will be opened, and the total spaces required for that for the restaurant would be 32. So we have provided 35 spaces on site, which are all conforming to the regulations. 2 of them will be ADA compliant. 1 of them will have van accessible, and that's pretty much it. We have as far as stormwater, we are proposing clamshell paving, which will take all that impervious asphalt that we have there and turn it into a pervious surface. We are proposing to just infiltrate all that runoff. And right now, the stormwater report analysis is under peer review. And once we hear back from them, we will address the comments and address everything back as soon as we can. And if anyone has any questions, I would answer them.
Okay, well, we're going to go in my order, Clark. Amy's up first. Amy, anything?
Okay, so I have questions on some of the original material that we had to work with. And then I have questions on what we just heard. So just to begin with, I'd like to say that we have a map sketch now that is very dense, and it would be far preferred for it to be layered so we could see each use separate from the base use and have a better understanding of what that means. So I'm asking you to decompose your map so it's much clearer to us to understand what you're doing. We've moved from a previous model to a new model, and it would be useful to have an understanding of how you've evolved from the past to the present so that we can confirm your objective and the trajectory that you're making. Another comment that I think still sort of hangs out there is, what do you define as mixed use? I want to make sure that our understanding of mixed use and yours is exactly the same. When you've gone before the zoning board and you have worked out the rubs, the things that are going to be very difficult, it would be very clear, very helpful to have that actually listed to us so that we don't have to take an oral argument and try to create some sort of a list of it. We want to be able to help you be successful going forward. This is changing subjects, but one of the questions that will inevitably come before the town is, what about walkers who don't bring in? So the whole question of parking is, how many spots do you need? When do you need them? And for what do you need them? And one of the questions is, that's a very dense part of Cohasset, and people are going to be walking rather than driving, but it's going to create pedestrian traffic. And I'm just wondering how you're thinking about that. Another issue is you have made much clearer than as we are going along as to the hours of different uses being operational. And it'd be very nice to have one page that says coffee shop, hours of operation, parking expectations, numbers of patrons, rather than having it be sort of buried in materials that we've seen. It's not that you're making a mistake. It's really more so that we can check off things as we see them being important. One of the questions that I still don't fully understand about is the numbers of kitchens that are being proposed for the project. And I understand much better how you're managing time, but I'm still not really clear how these different activities will cause to come into existence traffic that need to be managed, either because it's wholesale, or it's retail, or it's consumer oriented. It would be nice to have the documentation of the negotiation that you worked out with ZBA, so that we don't go back over things that you've already had some discussion about. Another comment is, do we have a final document on record about fire and how the actual physical facility is going to be managed by fire? What are we going to do about trash removal during the day? And what are we going to do about deliveries of pieces of equipment that are highly varied in size? That's going to make a difference in how the parking works. Another issue, which is a sort of a digression, but is one that still is not clear to me, is how does the small dock meet the requirement of being a water use? And I'd like to see that specified so that it is laid out according to state regulations. So
Can you say that again, Amy?
Well, they speak of the site being in a situation of which not having to have further Chapter 91 review, and it's all predicated on the small dock. And I just want to know exactly how that works, so I don't ask the question again of how that works.
Are you avoiding Chapter 91?
Well, let me just finish. And these are just items that I went through and I tried to sort of summarize, because we have almost 30 documents. I tried to summarize things which are counterpointed and things which are still changing. And these are items that are still in my mind not completely clear. It's not clear to me what the sidewalk planning is going to be about. And how we're going to manage retail kiosks, where they're going to go during different times during the season, the covered wharf, how is that going to operate in the conjunction with the restaurant? I mean, I have a lot of things which we've been presented with, but we haven't had a confirmation of their resolution.
Can I just interrupt for a minute though? I want to remind everybody that there, again, we have separate jurisdictions between ourselves and the zoning board. Site plan review deals with 12.6B1 through 6. Some of the issues you have raised address those. The specifics of the uses is the zoning board's purview under their special permit. Their special permit governs what uses will go there and whether those uses are substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or not. Ours are engaged with being harmonious and not injurious, and with traffic. I just want to remind everybody on the board to respect the jurisdictional lines here. And our jurisdiction under site plan review is not as broad as you might think. Interesting questions, but they are questions for the ZBA in some respects. Some of them are perfectly fine.
And I totally appreciate what you're saying, Tom, but if I don't say them now, I don't have a venue to be able to say them any other place because I don't have a jurisdiction that
Well, you go to the zoning board meeting.
Well, I could do that, but my experience in cases is it's best to get everything out on the table right away rather than having to wait, you know, laboriously through various sets of issues.
Yes.
So I think you truncated what I wanted to say. I said a lot of things, but these are some of the items that I see as a planner and someone wondering about best and better and use are things that ought to be in the record.
Understood, but the board cannot spend inordinate amounts of time on things that are not in our jurisdiction. That's all my point is. So again, a lot of it is within our jurisdiction and the decisions we have to make. All right, Kevin.
I have one simple question. Maybe it isn't simple, probably is. What's the red line that's outlined on this figure in front of me? How is that? What is that? I don't believe it's defined anywhere.
So yeah, that line represents the existing footprint of the building.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Deirdre?
Sorry, mine may be totally unrelated. I'm just curious, the dock space that's going to be off of this structure, is this like a parking space for boats to come into the harbor and get off? Is it going to be more dockage space for the harbor? Sorry, it may not be related. Just curious. And then my only other question, two other quick questions is, the holding tanks for the lobster pound, are they being relocated to this facility or are they staying in the old building? In other words, where are all the lobsters that sit in the water at the pound now if you go to get your lobsters, which I do regularly? Are they going to be in this structure or are they going to be still over in the other building? And then I understand that my understanding was that the old salt house and this next new structure were going to be sharing a kitchen. Is that true, or is Salt House going to have their own kitchen and we have these other three kitchens? That's it. Those are my three questions.
Okay.
No, excuse me, Mr. Padilla, just a second. Related to that is, in the parking calculations, you're calculating your own building, but is there not going to be a natural tendency for users of the Salt House, which is open at different hours than your restaurant or earlier hours, for the Salt House patrons to use your parking, and how is that going to be addressed or prevented?
Mr. Callahan, it's Adam Brodsky. We're happy to answer questions and however you wish to place that. I mean, with respect, we discussed specific conditions with the zoning board to ensure that only patrons of our property use our parking. That would include a monitor and things like that. So those are issues that have already been discussed with the zoning board.
All right. Well, to the extent those go into our jurisdiction about the parking, and following up on what Amy's saying, it would be nice if we saw all that.
We're waiting to see those conditions also from the zoning board, but those are some of the things we discussed. Old Salt House has its own kitchen. It's a separately demised space And I believe the kitchen that is shown on the site plan relates to our restaurant. So that's a separate operation. I think there's some confusion regarding the dock. It's been shown on some of the site plans, but is not part of the project. That dock is separately licensed under Chapter 91, which is the State Public Waterfront Act, and is regulated by DEP. It's not really part and parcel of this submittal. I do want to note that portions of the site do fall within DEP's waterways jurisdiction, and there are licenses that relate to the actual fill in the site. And we will obviously have to consult with DEP regarding whether, for example, we would need to amend the existing licenses, and that's a conversation we'll have with the state. But we've got to do that as we comply with all of the laws that relate to this development, whether they're state laws or town laws. I'm hopeful that once you see the updated architectural plans, that will help Ms. Glassmeyer sort of show each layer of the development, because those the final uses are going to be displayed on that. The issue of mixed use is no longer relevant. That had to do with how we calculate the parking, and we've reached agreement with the Zoning Board of Appeals that we're using sort of the Cohasset's standard parking methodology for restaurants, which relies upon seat counts as opposed to square footage. So the mixed use issue is no longer relevant. Gabe can explain the pedestrian circulation. All of the hours of use have been laid out simply on the site plan. I realize it's a dense plan, and I guess we're happy to take that information and put it on a separate page, but explains all of the uses, the hours of operations, the parking that's required. In addition, we did do a parking analysis that's part of the submittal package where we broke everything down. Trash removal has been addressed. We described that, I believe, when we were in front of you last time. It's been some time. I don't think there have been any material changes. Gabe can certainly speak to that. The last issue is the kiosks. The actual location of the kiosks is shown on the site plan. And so we can display and let you know where that is. So again, happy to answer any of these questions in the order. I'm keeping track of them all, as you can see.
All right. Deirdre, any other comments? Deirdre?
Unmute, sorry. No, I'm sorry, this sounds like a stupid question. I'm just curious about the tanks for the lobsters. Are they staying in the old building or are they coming to the structure? I know that sounds crazy, but.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I assume that's a negotiation with the tenant. I assume that there will be lobster tanks there because there will be a retail component. I mean, it's principally a wholesale component, so I assume that there will be lobsters in the building. I don't know that for a fact. I don't know if anyone else on the team can confirm that.
So it's going to be much smaller.
Can you hear me?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm trying just to engage the video, but we will build new tanks at the new location. In the renovation of Cohasset Wharf, in the location shown as Lobster Pound, we're going to build new holding tanks. The current holding tanks at the location are going to be removed as part of a redevelopment of that property. We're finishing those plans, and we look forward to showing you the plans for that property, which is going to be converted into an inn. And then we're going to build new tanks at this location.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you. You're all set, Deirdre?
Yeah, I just was, are they going to be, no, yes, I'm all set.
Are you sure? I'm happy to answer it further. I'm not, you know, it's going to be a nice new facility created inside that shell with new, holding tanks for the local businesses, and then a small retail space in front where you can walk in. There's no seating in the Lobster Pound, but it's going to be a purchase location, and then still engaging with the local lobster business. So we'll have new tanks. Essentially, it's a new concrete pour with new filtration systems in that location.
Okay, I was just hoping it doesn't get downsized for our local businessmen. Thank you.
Oh, and then here's the diagram that the architects.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
I would also point out one other piece that you'd mentioned. When we did the parking calculation and came to agreement with the zoning board, the term kiosk became very confusing for people. The retail area that's shown, what we simply did was apply the parking requirement metric for retail on a per square foot basis for that area. So instead of the confusion of what's kiosk and seasonal, I know Gabe had mentioned that earlier, but in the end, the 32 space requirement, we counted that area in a per square foot ratio. So that is simply more, should be really more considered just retail. To take out the confusion of quote kiosk.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Chris.
Just one question. About 5 years ago, and the map that's up right now is perfect to illustrate this, where you have Old Salt House patio, there was a collapse over there. So I would just appreciate some analysis of what you've done to ensure that what you're building here for the rest of this isn't going to be subject to that same issue that caused the collapse 5 years ago.
Yep, that's a very good point. I think from the onset on this, Chris, the whole intent was to really just as a renovation, maintain the structure and be very careful in sort of some removal of certain pieces to sort of reimagine the building. So we're going to work towards that. We've got a contractor we've engaged. We've done a lot of due diligence with the structure. You know, renovations can be tricky, but we will deal with it. We expect it to not have that condition of a fallout like they had.
And Mr.
I think that's a fair question under site plan review as well. But I have to believe that in purchasing this property, some kind of analysis of this wharf, given what happened next door, was done. So I presume you have some data right now about the structure of that wharf at this point.
And again, Mr. Chairman, this is Adam Brodsky. I'll defer to the professionals. I just want to make it clear, since I have some knowledge regarding the old Salt House, which is a separate property and separately owned, that's a historic wharf that dates to colonial times and had been subject to some, I'm using the word loosely, improvements that were not authorized, that I think contributed to the failure of the fill. We have an entirely different condition on this property, whereas Gabe.
Well, I think it's a fair comment, and again, under the criteria of site plan review, to ask about the safety and integrity of it. So if whatever documentation you have, if you could provide that, we'd appreciate it. Chris, anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
All right, Clark.
Yeah, I still think that the concept that you're proposing for the adaptive reuse of a huge restaurant facility is great, and I applaud your team for your efforts. I do have questions about the parking lot, though. In looking at the aerial photography over the last couple of minutes and what you have on your site plan, I can't exactly tell what you look like you have a crosswalk. I can't really tell how the crosswalk interrelates to the parking area, the public right of way, and what's labeled a gutter line. It looks like from the Gulf end side, where you have the guardrail on the bottom of that page, where you have the guardrail coming across that you 90 and then go along the water's edge in a dedicated path. Is that right? There's a dedicated path where your arrow is? And then
that is
90,
correct.
And then at 90, so that's a great amenity for the town to have a dedicated space there. And then you 90 in front of the facility. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right. So that would be public use and access. Now, what about on the left-hand side, the diagonal, where you have an island? There's an existing island, but it appears that you're creating a bigger island with raised curbs and trees and things in the middle there.
That is correct.
Okay. Raised curbs, and is it so? It's planted, and I I think probably we need a detail of that. And it looks like the curb edge is right on your property line. And based on the sea of asphalt that you have there, it looks like there's some on-street parking space that will be picked up along where your arrow is right now. So maybe 5 or 6 parking spaces along that edge between the island radius, the entrance and exit, or whatever entrance exit on both ends, that you're picking up some on-street parking. Is that right? Compared to what's there, which is just a sea of asphalt.
Well, we are not proposing any parking outside of our property lines.
Off
So
locus.
we
Yeah,
are,
but that would be existing parking, and you're not interfering with that existing on-street public way parking.
that is correct.
Okay. And then what are you showing that looks like crosswalk in your through your drive aisles? What is that? I don't see a label.
So these are cobble strips.
Okay.
We have the pavement, the parking lot itself is going to be clamshell.
Yep.
So that'll keep a buffer between the clams and the asphalt.
Okay, the cobble strip. So in that island area, what do those crosswalks hit? Do they hit island? So do you have to walk around or in the right of way?
Yes.
So there's no dedicated sidewalk space there. It's just a way to identify hardscape for and a space for people to go through where cars might be coming in and out, and that's where pedestrians can cross that. But in terms of where you dump out at the island, it's whatever works out, right? Have you talked to the town engineer about?
Clark, Gabe, can I just jump in here real quick? This is you're bringing up a really important point, Clark. And I'd actually like Gabe to, after we just look at this quickly, is to show the existing site plan. So the gutter line that you mentioned is
it's way out there.
That's
Right.
the actual edge of the street. There's literally for a continuous section of Border Street, there's a small granite edge along that. And that essentially is the sidewalk. So if you imagine the gutter line and then the property line is the dark black line. So we're actually creating a much wider pedestrian sidewalk. The granite rumble strips you're talking about are really more rumble strips you drive over. That's not a walkway per se. You walk across that perpendicularly.
Okay, so you're saying
really
that's
what's
like a
happening,
transition between the crushed shell and the public way asphalt.
Right, that's really just to contain the
Not a
crushed
walkway.
space. But what's really amazing about this project, if you follow that gutter line all the way up past the loading dock, for example, and past to this direction, safety has been very important for us. And so creating proper entrance and exit points to the parking lot, having code conforming parking, but then creating a wider sidewalk so that pedestrian, bicycles, the kids in town bicycling can come along the sidewalk. And Gabe, maybe you could flick to the plan that shows the existing site plan, which is really a problem, because what happens with the existing site plan is people park across see where the gutter line is here, Clark?
Yeah.
Spaces 37, 35, 36. That's when you see today, people park nose to nose over the property line and they park over the sidewalk.
Yes, I understand
We're
that.
keeping all the parking inside the property line, which is the heavy black line. And we're then maintaining the gutter line, which is a public gutter line. We don't control that. But if you then imagine transversing that now or bicycling along that now, you're crossing vehicles with pedestrians, which is a problem. So we're trying to improve the safety. So if we go back, Gabe, to what we're proposing, you'll start to see the widening of the sidewalk beyond the property line. So now we're not parking over that and crossing uses. So we create ultimately a much wider boulevard sort of, sidewalk. And then if you go along past the old Talt House, ZBA asked us just to leave those diagram spaces in, which are partly on Tom's property and partly off Tom's property. But they're shown, but in reality, that just becomes a wider pedestrian zone. So that's the offsite component, but it creates a better pedestrian connection from this location down Border Street, ultimately to Border Street Bridge.
Right, yeah, I understand, but what it looks like, you've got like pedestrian crosswalks at the edge of your property line. And I don't know if they'll be used as such, but what I'm wondering is if it might make sense to move those, to adjust those locations, whether they're off locus, off your property line, or just exactly where, so that there's more of a continuous path along the street edge, or to a consideration for how parking in the public way could work. And I know that you know that there's been some study. There's a group that's studying parking around the harbor, and they may have thought about this particular area a little bit already. The landscape architect Mark Sardina is probably the best non-municipal employee expert on this, but I think it might behoove you and your team to see what options there might be for creating a walkway area on the west side of your island. And if you could, for next time, provide a little bit more detail on how that island is as a part of, if you could follow up on that way. This is the most important element of this to me, that the walkways and the parking are safe and convenient, and they make sense compared to what's there now, and maybe finding some flexibility with the town in terms of building your hardscape, what looks like a crosswalk.
Yep, we can do that.
Yeah, just explore those options as thoroughly as possible.
No problem. And
I think you'll be fine.
Shown of what's inside the property line only, and solving everything within the property line.
Yeah, I know. I know that would be your goal, right?
Guys.
Keep everything on locus. But if there's some flexibility that that can work with the town and create an actual walkway and more on-street parking, I think that's dynamite. Now on the southern, on the let's see, the lowest edge, if you could scroll up just a little bit to the lower edge, the other way. Yeah, down there. So we've got some fencing, and then there's a big jog, but the space between your gutter line and your property line is like 20 feet. And it seems like, I don't know, that's a couple of parking spaces or a pedestrian dedicated zone. I'm just not sure. It just seems like that whole space is 40 feet by 20 feet, and it's not doing anything. It's not doing any work right now. I certainly wouldn't recommend head-in parking for the public way. I think that would be dangerous, but that's also an area that probably could use some consideration and vis-a-vis what's public and what's private property. Those are my only comments.
All right, thank you. Lauren, I guess Weston and Sampson is not here. Is there anything you would like to say?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Carolyn, anything that's jumping out at you?
No, Mr. Callahan. I mean, I've also been sitting through the ZBA hearings, and I know that there's been a lot of back and forth, as Attorney Brodsky said, and I think there was some progress finally made at the last meeting about parking. So I'm hopeful at our next meeting, you've got some direction from the ZBA.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see any public comments. Is there 3 members of the public out there? Does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Raise your hand now, otherwise we'll move on. All right, seeing nothing. All right, Lauren, what are we looking at for a time frame for this?
So the next two meetings are August 10th and then September 7th. So it's dependent on the board if you wish to wait until after the zoning board meeting.
Yeah, when are they dealing with this?
I believe they said August 15th or 16th.
Okay, all right, so entertain a motion to continue this to the September 7th.
Mr. Callahan, it's Adam Brodsky. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir. Would it be possible to get on the agenda for August 10th? I would expect to have at least a draft of the zoning board's conditions, which I think is what you really want to see. And we are trying desperately to complete the permitting by the end of the summer. So and if we don't have that information, then we can push it to the 7th. But we're already candidly months behind on this through no one's fault, but we're just.
No, I
trying to reach an
understand.
endpoint.
I'm just concerned about how our dance card for the 10th is looking already. I don't relish these marathon meetings. Lauren, could we accommodate the 10th?
I believe so.
All right.
We have one new large house review. You have the two continued site plan reviews, but I don't think that those will take much time based on the discussion. So I do think that you could take this up if the board wishes.
Okay. Motion, please. Anyone? I'll make it. I'll move to we continue this to August 10th at 6:30.
Second.
All in favor, Clark?
Aye.
Tom Callahan, aye. Amy?
Esmer, aye.
Kevin?
Kevin Heine, aye.
Deirdre?
Your Hobson, I.
And Chris?
Aye.
All right, thank you. And yeah, whatever draft conditions are coming from the zoning board and, Ms. Glassmeyer gave you a long list of information, requests, many of which deal with our bylaw. If you could provide that in advance, we'd appreciate that. We asked for a week in advance, so that's just a week away. So hopefully we'll have all that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you
Thank you very
to you and your team. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. To the board, we have one more issue to discuss. Administrative thing. We have some minutes, do we not? I think Angela circulated some minutes. That was from the meeting. That was the last meeting.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So we have a motion to approve the minutes of July 13.
I have just one request.
Yep.
And I know it's petty, but the spelling of my name be corrected.
Well,
It ends in an E, not an A. Sorry.
That is not petty at all.
Sorry. I apologize.
Deirdre, don't apologize.
I've spent my whole life.
Subject to that amendment, a motion please to approve.
A motion to approve the minutes from July 13th.
Second.
All right, Clark Brewer,
Aye.
Tom Callahan, aye. Amy?
Kevin Heine, aye.
Amy, you're muted, but I saw you say it.
I said it, Esmer, aye.
Deirdre?
Deirdre Hobson, aye.
All right, and Chris?
Aye.
Okay. Lauren, do you have anything, a staff report to bring us up to date on?
Honestly, I don't have anything to update this time. It's been a very busy week and I've really just been working with master plan implementation and working for the zoning stuff. So I'm sure we'll cover it all when we get to the next topic.
Okay. And just a reminder, I had circulated an email to you all that I was reminded by the town manager that by state law, there has to be a planning board representative on the Community Preservation Committee. I know we had decided a few weeks ago we weren't going to do a lot of liaison assignments, but this is one we have to do. So I'd appreciate it if someone would step up and volunteer to take that role. As I said in my email, I think they might meet throughout the year, but their heavy lift is before the two town meetings. And I have served on the committee years ago and more recently as this board's representative. And, you will be involved in the decision making on spending the tax dollars that are raised by the Community Preservation Act. So appreciate it if somebody could think about it and adding that to your duties. Much appreciated. If you do want to volunteer for it, let me know. If there's multiple volunteers, then we'll have the board as a whole decide.
I was on it for a year about 15 years ago.
Yeah, I was on it when it was founded, and then just 2 years ago when I got on this board. So interesting stuff. Little outside the planning realm, but for whatever reason, state law made a planning board representative one of the mandatory seats. All right, so our next thing to discuss is to bring you up to date on what's going on with the zoning bylaw rewrite. Especially for you new, I'll just try to give a brief overview. There was a zoning bylaw working group created 2 years ago. The reason being that the boards that normally would have jurisdiction over zoning, just didn't have the bandwidth to focus on that in addition to our regular duties, so a specialized committee was formed. It was originally created as an offshoot of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Come April of this past year, April and May, as the result of resignations and the election, 4 of the 7 members left the committee. This board, after the election, picked Clark as our second representative of this board, in addition to myself. So we're back up to 4 members. As of last night, we now have 5. David Farag is going to be joining us. The select board is working on getting a 6th possible member who's been discussed, David McMorris. And to the public out there, there is still room for a 7th member. So you would express your interest in writing to the select board if you're interested in that spot. So with all of that, as one of the surviving members of the working group, oh, by the way, now the committee has been reconstituted as the zoning bylaw committee. And now we are a direct report to the selectmen rather than to Master Plan Implementation Committee. Moving along, we had left the point in April when the committee really stopped meeting that we had done 2 years worth of very valuable research and gathering data. We had come to some consensus on the form of reorganization. The purpose of all of this is to both reorganize and clean up the bylaw, and then to review and see if we need any substantive changes, since by all accounts, even though we've added so much to the bylaw over the years, the last really comprehensive review of the bylaws core regulations was 1986. And best practices, we are being told by experts, is that the bylaw should be read every 5 to 10 years, and it's been 30 plus, so it's time for that. So we are moving along with trying to pick up the schedule of getting this all done by spring 23 town meeting. The select board had asked that it be split up into 2 meetings. We have a draft of a bylaw that I put together just because somebody needed to have a starting point. I have put together a draft of a town meeting schedule to do this in many articles so that perhaps some things pass, other things might not, rather than have everything as a whole shooting match. The zoning bylaw committee, as reconstituted, will be meeting the 1st and the 8th of August, and then hopefully the 29th of August. It's a very aggressive schedule to get in schedule with the 2 town meetings. We essentially would have to have any articles for the fall ready by September. We would come to the formal bylaw review with this committee in October, select board and advisory committee, then zoning board reviews in November, and the December town meeting. So there is a lot of work. There's things to do. The fall town meeting would be heavy on the reorganization, which is really just moving parts around. The spring is where we would deal with more substantive changes, if any substantive changes are proposed. I have been asked to meet with the select board on Tuesday, the 2nd, at their meeting to go over the final okay of the process and things we're doing. We are bringing town council into the process. We had not in the previous 2 years, and I think that was largely a function of budget and authority to bring them in and money to spend on them. But we have brought town council in. I met with Carolyn and her partner, Judge Cutler, in late June. And I believe what the select board and the town manager are asking us to do in advance of Tuesday's meeting is to sign off on a scope of work for KP Law. I think that's been circulated to everybody and everybody has seen it. I had put together an alternative before that I do not believe has been circulated. I can pop it up on the screen if anybody wants to see it. But the scope is, how, as I discussed this with KP and how I see it, is that we start working from the bylaw that we have, draft of changes that I and the committee prior had put together, the reorganization that the committee had reached a consensus on. The scope, the scope is talking about more, I think, of the rewrite in the actual text coming from KP, originating from KP. But again, we've had 2 years of work under our belt before they've gotten involved, with all due respect. And certainly KP is going to be a partner in this. There's not going to be one, what's been drafted is not the be all and end all, and is not going to be the be all and end all. The committee is at the point, as it was when it broke up in April, to begin reviewing the text of the bylaw. To keep on the schedule for 2 town meetings, we do have to jump into it. We have always planned for public outreach. We are planning for the first public forum on August 15th. There would certainly be another 2 or 3 before the fall town meeting in December. And at that forum, the first one will be like the mile-high overview of the process and what topics need to be looked at. And the whole point is to get the feedback of the community on this. So, Lauren, you correct me if I'm wrong. I think the only takeaway, I want to first hear from everybody else what they think or have questions about the process, but the takeaway the select board, I believe, is looking for us is to support the scope of KP's duties. And I'm, I guess, again, I'm not so sure we're on a different page, but the timeline has to be respected. And I think the deep dive analysis of the bylaw is going to go section by section rather than do, a comprehensive triage of the whole thing at once. I will tell you that the select board, at least one member I've spoken with, it's possible on Tuesday. They say, don't do this in 2 pieces and let's do it all at once in the spring. That's a big lift for the town, but I think we could do it if we had to. Splitting it up into 2 pieces is not easy, but I think I've come up with a way of reorg first, substance later. That can be done. So we'll see. The selectmen, this is one of their number 1 priorities of their goals and objectives. So, they're driving the bus right now. And so, Lauren, just tell me, they're not looking for anything other than us. I mean, I'm going to discuss the timeline and whether they agree with it or not on Tuesday.
So yes, I would say to sort of clarify what the situation is here, we have received a scope of work from KP Law in which KP Law has sort of broken out what their tasks would be. And it involves having KP Law take a first draft at taking a diagnostic of zoning and doing the writing, whereas the alternate path, which is what Tom is suggesting as a preferred route, is that he has already written the reorganization and he would like to use his document as a starting point. So the board, as I've been indicated, the planning board should take a position as to how they wish to move forward in terms of these 2 options. The other thing is just to make sure that everyone is on the same page about timing, given that moving toward this special town meeting, as Tom laid out, would be a very aggressive and condensed schedule over the next 2-3 months to get that ready. So that those are just items that the board wants to take a vote on.
Yeah, and again, the scope I've laid out for town council is, I don't think, mutually exclusive to their scope. If it hasn't been clear, I certainly expect their deep dive of suggestions of changes, edits, and given their knowledge of other towns' bylaws, to point out flaws in ours that haven't been obvious to us to begin with. And I want everybody to know that, with the original working group, we've had quite a few years of experience with the Cohasset zoning bylaw on our team. So, the identification of what our issues, they're certainly not mine. I think they're part of the collective wisdom of those who've dealt with the bylaw over the last few decades. But anyway, I have, well, hold on. Anyway, so let me first open it up to questions. I'll go in the rotations. Yeah, so if I continue with my rotating alphabetical order of things, Deirdre, I think you would be up first if you have any questions about the process and where we stand.
No, I don't at this time. I think that having the meeting with the selectmen is the next step. I agree. I think what the role of this committee needs to continue to focus on is not actually drafting those, so that I think, Tom, you have done so much work on this, and I know you've been extremely dedicated to it. So I'm glad that we can now have KP involved, because it is an incredible amount of time that is necessary to finally, in the end, recreate bylaws that have not been touched in this town for an extremely long time, beyond, having worked in state government, I can tell you it's kind of a laughing joke that we haven't dealt with these. So that being said, I agree with the process that's happening here. I have no other further comments. Thank you.
And I want to add, I'm not expecting earth-shattering changes from the select board on Tuesday. It's just that they want to make sure everybody's on the same page on the process and the steps, and and being fully transparent to the public, and which I certainly agree with. In retrospect, we brought KP in earlier for a number of reasons I don't have to do. We didn't, but they're here, and I expect to work in a very close, for the committee to work in a very close partnership with them. So, Chris.
This sounds like a big job with a lot of potential implications. So I want to make sure we're clear on, is there a policy objective that we're hoping to achieve? Do we want the bylaws to enable or prevent any specific kind of activity, or is this really just a cleanup exercise?
Well, I got to get this out of the way. Hold on 1 second. Can I share this screen? Let me see. Hold on. Your screen sharing. New share. Where is this screen? I'm sorry. Is it this screen? No, sorry. How do I get rid of this?
You see the PowerPoint now, is that what you wanted?
Yeah, there's one page that tells you why. What we are doing and why. Can you see this?
Yes.
All right, because I've discussed this with individuals who have asked what is the philosophy behind this, and I would answer that to say there's not one particular philosophy. Reorganization and housekeeping is certainly needed, because the original bylaw, I think, was articles 1 through 13. We've added on 14 through 22. We've put definitions on some of these new articles. The new articles deal with specific kinds of uses. They're separate from the core uses article. Definitions are all over the place. Sometimes there's conflicts. It does need reorganization and housekeeping. And the objective for the fall would be to accomplish that.
So there's no policy objective here. This is really about cleanup, eliminating circular references, confusing references.
The policy objective is cleaning it up, simplifying where we can, user friendliness. But then in the second part, the substantive changes, which I will tell you that the working group has researched different topics and we've discussed what topics to look at, but we have made 0 substantive change recommendations, but for one that we almost brought forward last fall, and that's height in the harbor. And but Cohasset had major changes. You know, the bylaw passed in 55. In the late 60s, we made a major change. In 1986, we made some major change, and we haven't done it since. So we have to. It's time that Cohasset's changing. Development patterns are changing. It's just time to relook at things and see if we are happy with what we've done, or do we need to change things that we've done. So you know, and that will come for the spring town meeting.
And the 2 cents I'll throw in is that it does look like there are policy changes on the table here, which is a big deal. So I just want to make sure that gets.
Well, it depends what you consider a policy change, but that's
open
where
space, affordable housing, viability of commercial sectors. I expect intelligent people could disagree about how those should be implemented. So that's not something we conclude here tonight. It's just
no,
that
we're not concluding here tonight, but what changes we make in the bylaw to possibly address those different topics would be coming up. And I'll just throw out one example, is that our use table right now that we looked at tonight with respect to the downtown business area that still exists in Beechwood, it is a laundry list of uses. And there was a case that Woody Chittick would bring up constantly about the dog place that's on 3A across from Stop and Shop. Well, we had some dog related uses defined and not specific one they needed. So they had to go to the land court to get permission to put in their use. So the exhaustive list has its pros, it has its cons. And the philosophy behind the proposed list, which again hasn't been debated yet, is simplicity. We brought back at town meeting 2 town meetings ago the use variance, which provides flexibility in uses, and the simplification into broader use categories would also give more flexibility on the theory that we need to keep 3 commercial areas viable, yet we're far away from the highway and don't attract certain development. Nothing is proposed to allow what we already prohibit. Nothing is proposed to eliminate something we prohibit at all. So there'd be no substantive change in that respect, but it's to be perhaps more flexible and encouraging, for example, different retail uses. That's the working philosophy. On the theory that Cohasset, you know, has a small commercial base, it benefits us fiscally to have a commercial tax base. And we need to encourage and make sure we keep 3 commercial areas viable. Anything else? Any other questions, Chris? Sorry.
I think it warrants further discussion because it feels like this goes into policy as opposed to just cleanup. And if we're going into policy, it feels like a broad discussion of where we want to go is appropriate.
Yep, understood. And that's what the committee will be dealing with. And that's where what the public forums are intended to help address. And, you know, I have it the last 2 years tried to update this board as much as I possibly could on what it's been up to and what it's been doing. And I intend to continue that policy. Tonight's the first opportunity since the reorganized bylaw committee and what's been going on over the last 3 weeks for me to do so. Absolutely. And then remember, the planning board, has a formal role to any warrant articles that go to town meeting, a formal role to conduct public hearings on them, and then also make a recommendation one way or the other. Clark?
Yeah, I did read KP Law's proposal, and you know, there's four elements, and they all kind of make sense, but not necessarily in relation to what you've done already. It's kind of like it's set up to look at our zoning bylaws as they exist now, without looking in parallel with what you're proposing in terms of drafts that have been worked out.
Well,
And wait
yeah.
a minute, I'm just gonna, just give me a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, but I don't want to answer points as they come up, so.
Getting an evaluation, like, you know, a reality check on our zoning bylaw as it currently exists definitely makes sense. Having KP Law provide best practices based on that evaluation. And then I think something that Chris has been touching on is the philosophy. I mean, yeah, we can reorganize our bylaw and change a few little tweaks here and there, but what is the philosophy behind that? And related to the zoning, I've heard like Deidre say, oh, we're overbilling, we're gonna lose the way Cohasset, the best of Cohasset. Other people have said, we shouldn't have any more, no more single family houses. And what drives what we want to put in the zoning bylaw? KP Law doesn't really address this. There really needs to be a philosophy, like we want to limit single family homes to under 10 a year, or we want housing diversity, but we don't want it in our neighborhood. We haven't even touched on what potential changes there could be to what are zoning districts, residence A, B, C, village, highway. And what I think Tom has also said is the transitions between the residential districts and the highway districts, the village district and residential districts is missing. Right now, these zoning districts kind of crash into each other. There are some setback requirements for highway, but it seems like we need transition zones in some cases, built in with some flexibility. So more compatible with residential uses could actually be created there. And anytime you change anything in a zoning bylaw, there are unintended consequences, no matter how hard you try to think through what the words are going to mean. Somebody's going to come up with something, a different take on it that you just like had no idea until you're sitting at a special permit reading the language that just got passed at town meeting. And you're like, oh, crap, right? And that happened a little bit with the harbor on how much commercial space we thought we were going to get.
Well,
So, I mean, I think there needs to be a mechanism, a real program that's missing from KP Law's thing on how we build consensus, how we reach agreement on what the goal is as a community, as a board, on the municipal side as well as the public side. And some of that exists in the master plan, but some of it's outside, and it's going to continue to evolve. And how that affects the actual language and things that we think are critical and a priority. I think it's a missing step.
Well,
the provider that does the changes to the zoning bylaws takes incredibly long. And I know I've brought this up before. There's just one change to the ledge that still hasn't been incorporated into our bylaw. I think it's going to be probably a year or a year and a half based on how they work before we get this reorganization structure incorporated. And then we'll have passed the organizational stuff, but it won't be, basically we'll have a new bylaws section on the E code 360, and that'll be our whole bylaw. And the old bylaw will have to say new bylaw being organized and incorporated into the new format. Now, coming. It's just, I think that's a problem for the two-step, because I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't like zoning bylaws at the fall town meeting generally, because it's always been a priority, a policy over the last decade or more, that zoning bylaw changes should be at annual town meeting, because hypothetically, there's more people involved with those kinds of multi faceted issues instead of the fiscal issues of fall town meeting.
I'll just say a couple things. First, I agree with you. We can never write the perfect bylaw. And we have had a lot of collective heads working on this, and we will have a lot of collective heads on this. And what I have on the screen is the scope that I wrote, which I like to think, and this is based on my conversation with Carolyn and Judge Cutler, that, this is certainly going to be a collaborative effort, but if we are going to follow the schedule of 2 town meetings and a reorganization step and a substantive step, like I said, the examination of the bylaw will come then article by article and section by section, rather than one comprehensive thing. I'm trying not, the bylaw working group lost the opportunity to bring anything forward at this past town meeting, and maybe have made this a 3-step process. So it is catch up, but the select board may say when they see the schedule, and we discuss it in more detail on Tuesday, that it's too ambitious. And it is asking the committee members for a very ambitious and rigorous schedule, essentially from now until next May at the spring town meeting. The driving, the source of what we're doing is, the master plan said that zoning bylaw reform was something that should be done. I don't know that the master plan got into too many specifics. We know from large home reviews that there's an increasing number of people who come into them opposing them, and there's a lot of people who express opinions about that. If you read the 143 post about the village project, there were complaints up and down. Well, the bylaws aren't doing this, the bylaws aren't doing that. There's a lot of people with opinions. There's a lot of people who don't know what we can and cannot do under state law, but there are, an overwhelming philosophy is, yes, it's just time to just take a look at it. It's just smart planning to take a look at it from time to time, and it's been a long time since we've done that. But there are people that have concerns about growth, the type of growth. Are there, I suppose there's a sentiment, well, let's stop all development. And I tried to dissuade people from the notion that we could ever do that. And Massachusetts zoning law isn't designed to do that. It's a very aggressive thing, and we have on the working group to this point identified topics to research based on what we hear from the public, from the forums that generated the master plan, from what we hear at planning board meetings, what the zoning board hears at their meetings, when you see comments like you do on 143 from time to time. But again, no decisions have been made, and it's going to be up to the town as a whole to decide what direction it wants to go. And we have data on how the town has changed since, let's say, the year 2000. We have some pretty good data on changes that have occurred. We can build out scenarios of what the town will look like one way, what the town will look like another way. We've passed 8,000 for the first time. Back when I was a select board member, the MAPC said we could have a build out of 12,500 people. I think the working number is more in the 9,000s right now, if things didn't change, if our bylaw was the way it was. And the question is, does the town want to be that? Will the town be able to do that fiscally? Will we be able to continue to support a K-12 system on our own? These are all questions we have to ask the community. And we're going to do that. I just don't think, the question is, can we do it within this timeline? And that will be up to the selectmen to decide.
So I'd just like to say that the master plan answered those questions. That's what the master plan was designed to do, was to tell us what we could do, tell us what might happen, and tell us where our current state was. And so I don't think we have to revisit that, other than to know that we have all that knowledge. I kind of agree.
Amy, that's correct, that the master plan is the source of this effort to redo the bylaw.
Right. So I'm just reinforcing that for you, is that, it was a process. It had a lot of involvement. And I guess I'm more of the thinking that what Clark had to say is really where we are now, you're being pushed as the chair of the planning board by the select board to change how the tempo of what we're doing and how we're selecting what we are valuing.
No, it's the reverse, Amy. I'm pushing the tempo, and I will admit to a certain degree of impatience in the zoning bylaw working group lost time without being able to do anything for the past town meeting, and the resignations hurt us and set
Yes,
it back.
okay, but
So
I'm saying what I hear from the select board, which is that we have a baseline, which is our master plan. And now the question is, what do we do with it based on both what we thought we knew and what we thought people knew, and now where people are at. And there's just some basic things that we could just say would be a great first step of accomplishment. And that is just to bring our zoning bylaw up to state standards, state practices, and not do any more than that as a starting point, so that we're not, the last town that has 45 deviations from what everybody else is doing. From that point, then we can operate really using information that's already manifested around us, of places that have gone through struggles and changes, and then they found some sort of optimum. And the thing I worry about is that we know from last year that the public is ambiguous and also ambivalent. We know they're ambiguous because we don't know who shows up at the meetings, and we know they're ambivalent because they'll say one thing and then they'll say another. And so how do we manage those two really diametrical perspectives and still start to move us going forward? And I thought that where the master plan implementation committee was originally going was, let's just come into alignment with what the majority of places in Massachusetts does. And then let's lay on top of that the sets of values and expectations and hopes and concerns for the town as a whole.
The idea about getting Cohasset is an outlier in many respects in our bylaw in comparison to other suburban towns. And that is one of the objectives of the working group, has been to clean those up. The fall town meeting was a definitional change of streets in ways that was designed to comply more with state law than to have this slightly varied definition that's common in the Cohasset bylaw, that we slightly deviate from the strict state definition. And we were trying to correct that. And yes, we didn't prepare for that because we didn't think it was controversial. And I don't want to rehash that, but from that, and even before that, we always planned to have forums to educate the public on what it is we are looking to do, or throwing out ideas, getting the feedback. The beauty of the forums that they will not be like town meeting comes to you with, here's a proposal, yes or no. Yes, it gets debated, but we're going to come to the town with, here's an idea, let's debate that and go from there and try to incorporate what the town wants. And that may change from forum to forum depending on who shows up, of course. We're not going to get 100% buy-in for anything. So we don't go in with that expectation. You go in with the expectation is that you try to explain this as best you can and get feedback and make sure you're transparent and taking the comments from people to heart. And that's always been the objective of the working group. We just hadn't gotten to that point until the committee somewhat fell apart in its number of members. So trying to pick up from that and move on to the next step. And again, so yeah, could we do this in, reorganize and clean up the bylaw, then deal on the substance with the outlier portions of the bylaw, and then deal with perhaps new change, something completely different? Or yeah, we could do it in that form as well, but that's the feedback we need to get from the committee. And, you know, I'm proposing to the selectmen this plan because everybody up until this point has been trying to keep to the objective of having this in place by spring 23. If it can't be done by spring 23, it won't be done by spring 23. But, you know, at the moment, let's start with the aggressive plan and see where it gets us. Like, the public forum on the 15th may be something that throws us in a completely different direction, depending on who's there and what issues they bring up. So,
Tom?
Yep.
I think, you know, as a brief part of this discussion, what we want to be able to do is consensus building. Now, I think every member of this planning board has a different perspective, and I respect everybody's differing perspective. And here's the tricky part. You know, Amy's talking about general concepts and, like, you know, easy low-hanging fruit goals. And you know, I just read through my notes about, but the thing is, consensus building doesn't happen by listening to your monologue on zoning bylaw work over the last 2 years. We need to have a methodology and be a good example of, let's go for the low-hanging fruit, the simple stuff. What does these board members support in terms of goals that would be implemented through the zoning bylaw language? And then the more complex stuff. I mean, I'm just saying, how can we build consensus with the town at a community meeting if we don't have a methodology for consensus building ourselves?
all right.
We got to try it. We got to make it work.
Well, no, look, first of all, the working group was set up as a separate committee for this very reason, is because this board, the zoning board, just does not have the bandwidth in their regular meeting schedule to take this task on, and a dedicated committee to taking on the task was created. And the good thing about the reorganization of it is that we're bringing in more citizen members than inside baseball board members. You and I and Jack are the only board members on it, and we're not the majority. And we have to have somebody quarterback this project. And again, I have tried to.
I know, Tom.
I'm not trying to dominate.
Just dominate the conversation, and
I'm not trying to.
Now that's the problem.
But I know more about what's going on.
I know you know a lot, Tom, but you don't know everything. You need us.
I didn't say I know everything. I know about this process and where it stands. That's all I'm trying to report on.
Because of our differing perspectives, to build consensus in a meaningful way.
Well, that's what the public forums are going to begin to do. That's what the
reconstruction board is a good place to start. It's like at home.
Well, again, the separate committee was set up to quarterback this. And if you're now again, the planning board has its formal role. That's coming.
No, I'm saying
if you're suggesting
consensus building, that's
if you're suggesting that now,
for that.
If you're suggesting that we have to now build uniformity on a recommendation between both the bylaw committee and this board, that adds a different layer of contact. As I said in a discussion today,
no,
I can't contact 25 people
and then come up with like a vote on, you know, this is a good thing to follow up on. This is not a good.
That's what the bylaw committee is for, Clark. And
the big picture stuff is something that the planning board can help with the bylaw committee.
Yes.
Like, should we have more housing? Should it be multifamily housing? Should we just anything over 5,000 square feet? How do we do that?
I have tried to bring this board up to speed on everything the working group has done for the last 2 years.
I know you've tried.
And with all due respect, it has met with silence, and it's late in the meeting.
That's the monologue thing. That's a problem. Like, I'll say something and you'll kind of like, you won't even key in on it. Like Amy's stuff, you basically ignored. And
no, it's not ignored.
I'm giving you a hard time. I'm just saying I have a lot of hope and respect for the diversity of the people on this board to work on a consensus building model that you can use in the public sessions, in the zoning bylaw working working group and as a foundation for getting zoning articles through town meeting.
All right. I'll defer to you people, but for example, there is an agenda for the next 2 meetings of the bylaw committee. And it is to begin the substantive review of the first 2 articles of the proposed new bylaw. If you wish, I will circulate every agenda and its backup material to this board as well. We have to avoid open meeting law concerns in making comments, but certainly people one-on-one can submit comments to the bylaw committee and they can be taken up. And I get it that you would think I'm ignoring you, but believe me, I listen to everything everybody says because.
No, it's what you do with it. But Chris.
Well, what I do with it is I started a starting point because nobody was starting a starting point, and you have to. At some point, we have to stop studying and get into the substance of the bylaw.
Absolutely, I agree with it. But
all right, so now there's a draft out there, and if you don't like it, comment, make changes. If you do like it, fine. I'm not wedded to what I wrote. I'm using.
I'm just talking about the philosophy of consensus building and using what we can do on the planning board as a model.
And I'm trying to do
Chris
that.
had his
I'm
hand
trying to
raised,
do
though.
that. Clark, I am trying to do that. I am here doing that. I am trying to do that. And if you got something you're on the committee, so I certainly anticipate working with you very closely on crafting this thing. But for the other members of this board, I'm all ears. And if you need to see the stuff, we now have a zoning bylaw committee page. Some of the material that's going to be discussed at the meetings before September is already up there to look at. I'll circulate it to you by personal email if you'd like, and comment on it. I want to take comments from as many people as I can get.
Well, Tom, you have to actually, you have to listen to people to show that you respect them.
Well, when somebody
just distributing stuff isn't necessarily a solution. I'm just saying, you are working really hard on this stuff. You're into it. I can see that. That's great. I'm here to help, not make things more difficult. I'm just saying, I think the consensus building part of this is missing from KP law. And I'm trying to come up with a methodology to make that
So we could probably debate this all night and dig this trench deeper and deeper, but let's agree we need to improve the process. It needs to be a consensus process. There's a variety of stakeholders here. And we can't just set up a meeting and if it's in the middle of August and we've already got a shortened summer because the kids only have 2 months of vacation, it's in the middle of August and no one shows up, we're not going to be successful from that perspective. That's just a little insight that I have with regard to the date that I heard.
Yep.
Second is people are going to show up. Let me just say here, and I'll be brief.
Yeah, no,
people are going to show up with an agenda, and that's what you always get.
Yep.
So you have to balance the stakeholders that show up and are comfortable saying something with the ones that don't until you get to the final point and they're ready to pull the rug out from underneath it because they don't like anything and they haven't been vested in the process. This is
Kevin, let me just say the August meeting.
Let Kevin finish. Tom.
I'll just finish, Tom. I'll be brief.
All right.
This rolling out public meetings, getting invested with the stakeholders, getting valid feedback on that and moving forward in a constructive way is a science and it's a part in art and there's specialists in that. And I don't know if there's anywhere in the scope of work that comes from KP law, maybe not. If they do propose it in there, I know it's going to be expensive coming from lawyers or in our scope of work to get a group that can set these up. We can't do it all. And anyone that is in this group that thinks they can do it all is mistaken because this is a big lift and it's a big goal here that's set forth by our select board. And we have to understand that and get set out on the right path with the right expectations going forward.
Good point, Kevin.
I just want to say, I'm hearing about a scope of work written by a contractor that's going to get the money to implement it. And I'm hearing about a scope of work that's already been written and has probably been out there for a while. And I'm not sure where we stand between the two. And maybe that's not even something that we hash out on this call because it's not the appropriate place for it. But we've got to have the experts that know how to do this stuff be tasked and have the budget to move this stuff forward, because we can't do it all ourselves.
All right.
So I'll just leave it at that.
Let me just respond to that. The starting a public forum in August is unfortunate. I'm the first to say that. And it is being done because the committee has lost time. And it is being done if we are going on a fall 22, spring 23 schedule. And it won't be the first and it won't be the last. And I've said this to other people, I'll say it here. First of all, the forum is going to be presented by Lauren and myself. At this point, we're working out who's doing what part. It is a mile-high overview to start with. I anticipate that the people with special interests and agendas who are at the December town meeting will be there. I anticipate their arguments. I know what I would say in response to their arguments. But decisions are not there to be made, so I'm not there to make decisions for people. It's unfortunate to start it, but it has to start. And it will be followed up by others. And any of these meetings, we're going to get some people, and we're going to get the vast majority of town who doesn't show up, but who then voice their opinions on 143 and complain. And I understand that. As far as KP goes, Clark, with your point, the working group from day one has consensus around that this bylaw change and the philosophy behind it has to be driven by us in the town, not by outsiders who, with all of their expertise dealing with other towns, don't know that. All right, and so KP, and that was explained to Carolyn and Judge Cutler, and I don't think they had any issue with that. And ultimately, the scope, by the way, is going to be the selectmen's call. I know they want our opinion, but this is going to be a partnership of their expertise with our own that we have, based on the experiences that we have from people with long service in this town who have had their ear to the ground of various issues over the decades. Just because we've lost some members of the working group doesn't mean, with some experience, doesn't mean we can't still talk to them, consult with them. As an example, the non-conforming uses and structures section of the bylaw, I would intend to sub out to the zoning board for their first whack at any changes to it. I would, with KP telling us, well, what do other towns do? And by the way, in that part of our bylaw, that's where one of the places that we've discussed before, we are a incredible outlier. And it's come back to bite the town, but whether we can fix it is a whole nother issue. But we're not doing this without consulting every bit of expertise that we have in-house. But unfortunately, it is August, but we need to have a starting point given the timeline if we continue with this timeline. If the selectmen say, let's defer the timeline to shoot for the spring, so be it. Then we're doing something completely different. Maybe the first forum is in September, and there'll be more bylaw committee meetings under our belt that give us some more direction of where this newly constituted committee wants to go. With the new membership, we may have a different direction and philosophy than the old committee had. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah,
Tom, can I make a suggestion? Because we're coming up on 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I think Kevin made some excellent points. And others also. But I think that maybe what the thing is that you bring what you've put together for scope of services, and then KP Law's scope of services, and to the selectmen, and maybe you ask your board members to give you 3 top concerns and priorities in terms of the zoning bylaw changes. Ask each of us to give you 3, or it could be 4.
All right. Well, we're meeting
Before your meeting on Tuesday. So
yeah,
that
no,
you
the
can
bylaw committee
go
is
to the
meeting
selectmen and have a meaningful discussion on, this is what other people are thinking, this is what KP Law said, and this is what I thought. And throw your cards on the table and see what you can work out without necessarily driving the agenda, but by listening to how the selectmen react to the information you've given them.
Yeah, I mean, the select board at this moment hasn't seen my scope of work, nor has they asked about it yet. And I think a lot of it is not understanding, no slam on them for not, because they're not in the committee meeting, what the working group has done for the last 2 years and how far along we came in the process. But the bylaw committee is meeting Monday. Our objective was to discuss Article 1 and the slideshow for the public forum, but I certainly think I will add this and we will discuss in the meeting the next night with the select board. I will make that a high priority. And, depending on the select board meeting, the whole thing about the public forum on the 15th may go by the wayside for now, and that's fine. And that'll give us more time to prepare that presentation. And that's fine. So, I'd like the individual committee members, like I said before, you tell me what you'd like to see from me, what level of detail of material. And again, it's not for the point of having two committees do this. That's why we set up the bylaw committee, but certainly your feedback is appreciated and desired. And again, you will have, even outside the formal role that would be coming, but there's material. Right now, what's on the zoning bylaw committee work site is the table of contents for the reorganized bylaw, which is just moving existing pieces around. The proposed new Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and Article 4. Article 1 is administrative stuff. Article 2 are the definitions. And the main role of the definitions is to consolidate them from being all over the bylaw in multiple places, and to reorganize them more by use categories for user friendliness. 3 is the districts, and Clark, you made a point about them. There's no change proposed for the districts other than naming the commercial ones.
Maybe there should be.
Well, the major change in 86 was the lot area for the residential districts, and that hasn't been reviewed since then. I will tell you, in the working group, that hasn't even come up on the radar of changing the 3 residential districts. There is thought about consolidating the polyglot zoning that's in the harbor. 3A, rather than having multiple types of commercial districts, just one. We have to get ready to accommodate the state's housing mandate near the transit station. We have to get ready for the zoning to accommodate that. The village, the same. No change in the boundaries of the village, certainly. And then Article 4 is the uses, and the major change in the uses would be the table. And it, like I said before, it proposes a simplification of the table, which people may or may not agree with. So, and it's all, right now, that is all on the bylaw committee's page for anyone to see. But if anyone wants to see anything in particular, anyone who wants to see this proposed slide, well, the slideshow I know is going to be changed because I start from writing extreme detail.
Lauren has her hand up.
No, I can't see. My screen's not on. I've got the share screen on. So let me close this off. Lauren, yes, please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I know you're getting into the detail about the chapters, and I don't want to get it. I can't continue to stay with you much longer tonight, but I just am looking for some clarification on a couple of points. Yep. Because I think it's important before we get next steps to move forward. Just the question of, is the board content with recommending to move forward as Tom has laid out or not? Because quite frankly, if we're not at a point to agree right now, I'm having a hard time scheduling a meeting on Monday when we also have a meeting on Tuesday to have like a kickoff with the select board to get us all on the same page. And if we're not there yet, I don't want to spend the time on Monday with everyone doing something that we may not be ready to do. And the same question goes for I want to get a pulse on timeline, because we do have a very aggressive schedule. Like I said, set up. We are basically meeting every Monday in August, which I know is not ideal for scheduling. And then as I'm looking, I just want the board to be cognizant that after tonight, we have one meeting in August, 2 meetings in September, and then we have a meeting in October. And that's what we would have to start targeting for the advertised public hearings for these bylaws. So we need language ready for 2 weeks prior to that, so that I can advertise those. So that's the timeline we're looking for. And I just want to make sure everyone's understanding of that so that I have my steps in order.
Well, yeah, and the scheduling, again, is not ideal. The second meeting of the bylaw committee was postponed because this things the select board was doing and not having more members appointed yet. It's difficult to upset that schedule if we are going forward with a fall town meeting. That's all I'll say. So I would like, as Clark said earlier, get some feedback from the committee, which now has a new 5th member, and at least meet on the 1st to discuss that and prepare ourselves for the meeting on the 2nd, and then we'll see what the selectmen decide. The most impacted by the schedule is Clark and I, because we have both this board and the bylaw committee to work on. Everybody else's input to the bylaw committee can be on their time and as they see fit to comment. But I'd like to keep the 1st on, just at least to poll the bylaw committee as to what direction we want to go.
And I still recommend that Tom sit down with as much information as he has and tries to hammer out with the selectmen with an open mind what makes the most sense. A hybrid between his outline and KP Law's outline, or something different that he's been informed of. But it's 10:02. I don't know how much more we have to talk about this.
All right. Well, Lauren, you and I will talk about Monday's meeting, but my thought is to keep it going for the moment. So, all right. I appreciate everybody's input. Again, my door is open. My ears are open to anything anybody has to say or suggest. Just remember, on this topic, like any others, we can't all debate on email together. It has to be one-on-one to me if you have comments. And again, look at the zoning bylaw page and see what's up there and tell me what you think. So anyway, motion to, and no other business, right, Lauren? I don't think so. So motion to adjourn, someone?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, moved and seconded.
Second.
All right, Clark?
Aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
Kevin Heine, aye.
Deirdre Hobson, aye.
Chris?
Chris Flex, aye.
All right, thank you all for your attention.
Thank
All right, and thank you, Lauren and Carolyn, for sticking it out.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.